All right, sorry about that. We technical difficulties. We're trying something new. Hopefully, it was using my laptop. Did not work. I'm gonna try doing it this way for it. So I've got. There we go. Let's see if we can get this back going. Viewers. Okay, I got Kayla. I got Cameron. Just got to get Chad back in here. Got Derek. Got Joe. Shane's watching. Let's see. Why can't I find him? There we go. All right, it's trying to add Chad now. Let's see, got Wi-Fi on. We're good to go on all that. All right, it's just trying to add Chad. Apologies for the technical difficulties, guys. Like I said, I was trying to do it on my laptop. Usually we do this on my cell phone, but I've had people complain that my face gets cut off and stuff like that for it. So we're trying something a little different. Let's see, try again.
There it is.
I try to get too fancy and try to use my laptop. Last time everybody kept saying, you can see like my nose up. So
Yeah, I didn't notice it last time. I saw people comment about it, but it wasn't the issue for me. But yeah,
once
man.
again, it's probably technology, whatnot, kind of biting me in the ass for a little bit.
Can you guys hear me okay on the headphones? I can't see the comments, so you have to let me know.
Yeah, I'm gonna bring up the comments again real quick for it. I can hear you perfectly fine on mine, at least.
All right. Cool.
So I'm gonna bring up a second one, just like over the comments beside me. Appreciate you taking the time. I know you're an hour ahead of us, so I always wanted to
Oh,
be
you're good.
respectful of y'all's time.
All
Except I
all
know
good,
I
man.
call you way too many times to ask you questions on stuff.
All good, man. I'm used to talking to the rest of the boys, so pretty much if
Yeah,
I'm
so
not watching my kid, then I'm doing something with fishing.
perfect. I've got everything set up for it. I've got a big list of questions, like I said before. I mentioned to you a minute ago, you thought it was a little interesting. You and Benny were my two most requested videos so far, and I've had a ton of people
That's pretty
sending in
funny.
questions, so I think this is going to be a good one for a lot of people, like especially more seasoned people and newer people that are kind of been watching the hell out of your videos. I think that post you guys
Hopefully I have
did,
an answer for him.
fake it till you make it, right? Nobody's going to be able to question you.
I'll give it to you guys real whether I know or not. So
All right, Chad. So first question, everyone wants to know, how the hell do we pronounce your last name?
Bougere.
Jared.
Yeah,
So I'm
Bougere.
taking Cajun,
Yeah, French.
French.
Yeah, so yeah, pretty much no one gets it right. I don't think I've ever heard anyone pronounce it right anyways. So usually like Busiere or Busier or something like that. So
That was kind of me for it. That's why I was
yeah.
like, Chad. We're like, how do you pronounce your last name? I was like, Chad,
Yeah,
mumble
it's a
it.
tricky one. That's all good though.
All right. So I guess the question that kind of, I don't even know this one is, how the hell did you get into slow pitch? That's what I'm curious. That's what I think a lot of us find interesting. Like, how did we
Uh,
discover?
I mean, I got in it just through Benny, and then there's another guy, Jeff, that owns like the original slow jigging group, the slow jigging North America. I don't know how to say his last name, but Benny could probably add it in there. Um, but basically, like I forget what year it was, maybe 2012. I was going to the east coast of Florida and fishing with Benny, Jeff, and there was a whole group of guys that would go over there and speed jig for amberjack during the spawn. And so I just went over there on an open boat and happened to go on a couple trips with those guys. Ended up getting a random invite with the guy Jeff and Benny on just a little small center console. I think that was out of Jupiter, and they were slow pitch jigging. I was speed jigging. They couldn't get a fish past the sharks at the time, and we were on like a crazy like rainbow runner bite is what it was, and the bull sharks were just tearing them up. But I was getting them past with the speed jigging, and so I was like, the hell with this stuff. Like that's not gonna work. Um, then I can't remember how long after, but soon after, I was buying a setup from the Jeff guy, and then from there, I just was pretty much hooked. And then I did it for a few years, and then I turned professional in paintball. Paintball took over. I took a break in between, and then here I am back, just going full bore. But yeah,
So I guess the next logical. Oh,
essentially, Benny and Jeff got me into it.
that's not the worst two people to get you into it.
Yeah, yeah, not at all. So they taught me a lot.
So I guess the logical kind of thing is like for a lot of us, we've seen you started off. How did you go from fishing with Benny and them to then now being like the go-to person that we see fishing in Japan? Like, how did that transition from like starting off and then working your way to like very traditional kind of going to Japan every year fishing?
I mean, I've always been kind of attracted to like the Japanese culture, just the way they, when they get into something, they're full bore into that one profession. And I'm once I get into something, like I'm all in. Doesn't matter what it is. It's like if I'm gonna do it, I want to do it the best of my ability. That's how it was with paintball and same with fishing. And then just randomly, I saw like a listing for a Deepliner trip, and I was like, well, hell, like I'm so into this. If I want to learn everything I can, like I'm gonna take this jump. And then so I flew to Japan the first time, I think 2 or 3 years ago. Went on that trip and went to dinner with the owner of Deepliner, and just I think what he appreciated was like the questions I was asking. I think it kind of shocked him as far as like how much we already knew in the USA, and like the questions I was asking him, I don't think people probably asked him before, and so he opened up to me like probably more than a lot of people from what some of the Japanese guys tell me is like the stuff he was telling me he doesn't share with anyone. And so him and I just kind of hit it off, and I've been going back since.
So I guess the question I was going to ask: how much Japanese did you know before you went over there? Were you
Zero.
zero?
Yeah, I
That's what
don't
I
know
was
any
curious
Japanese.
for.
Yeah, yeah, I don't
Still
know any Japanese.
no.
Yeah, I know like a few words, but that's about it. You'll see. I know a lot of you guys order from SPJ Labs. SPJ Labs is owned by a guy named Suzuki, and Suzuki was my interpreter while I was there. So Suzuki owns an online store in Japan that sells deep liner jigs and reels and rods to the USA. And but yeah, so he works closely with the deep liner guys and Angler Shop Aqua to sell products to the United States. And so he was kind of my in between guy. Now when I go over there, if he's not there, I'm just using Google Translate nonstop. So because the owner of Deepliner speaks zero English of any kind.
We've been curious on that one for it because we were discussing. Everybody's like, Chad has to be fluent. Like he goes
Yeah,
over
not
so
at
much,
all.
and then how much we've seen the photos of how like very authentic everything is. Nothing looks whitewashed or whatnot for it. Very much in depth in the culture. I was like, he's got to
Oh,
be
for
fluent
sure.
by now.
No, I mean like I have what is it? There's a play or an app called Pimsleur, and like I'm trying to learn on Pimsleur, but it's difficult, like my wife is Polish, she speaks Polish. I speak just a few words of that. I've never learned another language, so I mean even trying to delve into the Japanese is very difficult. Benny actually speaks Japanese pretty well. And
Really,
yeah,
I'm not
and then
surprised though.
yeah.
It seems like a man with a million things.
Yeah, but I mean it's cool over there. Another thing that helps is the I'm sure you guys are aware of Garage Nagi. So the owner of Garage Nagi, a gentleman named Tsutsumi, and Tsutsumi speaks English very well and understands English very well. So he's the mate on the deep liner boat during those trips. And so he's constantly coming out, letting us know. Obviously, we can see the sonar and tell what depth we're at, but he'll clarify like the target we're after in that area and so on.
So, what's been your favorite thing you've caught so far? I always have to ask while you've done the Japanese trips while you're over there.
I mean, I'm over there just to learn everything I can. Um, Target wise, generally when I go over there, I'm not there the time of the year to target the species that I really would like. But my best catch there, I caught a 110-pound yellowfin on my second trip there, and that was probably like the biggest fish. I think my favorite was my last trip. I caught what's called a hapuka, which is like basically a wreck fish in a way, but I think it's some type of a different species they have there. A little bit smaller in that particular area of Japan, and but yeah, it was super cool. Caught it in 800 foot of water, and no one was expecting it to be there.
Very cool for it. Yeah, I was curious with it because I know you do a ton there and it's a lot of learning stuff. But at the beginning, I assume there's got to be some that were still like business slash excitement, right? Like you're doing the
Oh, for
learning, but
sure. I
you catch
think
something cool. It's
that
hard to not keep that in as a fisherman.
the hardest thing was like the first time when I was so nervous for whatever reason, like jigging. I couldn't feel my arm, like what I was doing. I'm like, fuck, these guys aren't gonna know. These guys are gonna think I just don't know what I'm doing. And then I settled down and everything. And the first time I went there, luckily I was on the boat with another very good jig fisherman, Lamego from Brazil, which is probably the top jig fisherman in Brazil. And those guys were super cool, and we just had a great time, and everyone was just loose and having a good time.
That's pretty awesome for it. So we were always curious that I didn't know how you did the progression for it, and how you. And what's interesting is like we talked to Diego from the
Mhm.
group for it here, like he has a bunch of those, but he was stationed in like Indonesia and Malaysia, like
Uh-huh.
doing soccer recruiting or whatnot for it. So it's always interesting seeing how people become more integrated with, I guess, Brazil and or like Japan or kind of the more Asian fisheries or not the kind of culture for it.
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
very cool.
the Brazilian fishery, I would say outside of Japan, Brazil has probably some of the best jig anglers, just because the Japanese culture is very big in Brazil. A lot of Japanese people live there, and so it was kind of like crossed over. And so there's some great jig fishermen there. I fish with quite a few of the Brazilian guys now. Lamego's actually another field staff member of Deepliner now, and yeah, so there's some great guys there. I'm supposed to go there next year, hopefully. So.
I was about to ask you if you fished in Brazil yet. I know
No,
you've done pretty
supposed to
much everywhere
go.
else.
I was supposed to go this past year, but my son was born pretty much on the same week that I was going to go, and so it just didn't work out.
Very cool. So what is your background before this? Like, the only reason I ask that is like anybody who talks to you knows that you research the hell out of everything for it, like backwards and thorough.
Mhm.
For there's like nothing that's done out of waste. Like hell, all the stuff you've engineered, nothing's like. Are you an engineer or anything from trade or anything beforehand?
No, I mean I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. I didn't go to college. I graduated high school. Actually went to culinary school first. After culinary school, went to a machining school. Excuse me. And then after that, I went to flight school for helicopters. Got a private license in helicopters, and then paintball just took over my life essentially. And
Don't
then
do it.
yeah, I started playing paintball in 2004. I turned professional in 2008, and I've been playing professionally ever since.
No, those two make sense. Like if you ever been around a chef like Dexter, everybody super meticulous with
Hmm.
everything. And then also I've heard how much more dangerous helicopters are than flying airplanes for it. So if you're not on
It
your
can be,
top,
yeah.
on the top of your game for it, how it could be a lot more different for it.
Yeah, I just like the excitement, the adrenaline rush.
I can see that. You want to get in some bread and butter and kind of talk a little bit more
That's
jigging
totally
instead of background
up to
stuff?
you, man.
I got a
I'll let
big
you
list
lead
of
it. So.
stuff. And so basically all the conversations I've had with you at night is kind of some of the things I've come up with it. So I guess the first question is everybody wants to know like how did you find out about Deepliner and what makes Deepliner so special? Obviously you can pick whatever you want and you went with Deepliner. What made you go with them and then kind of explain what like separates their product?
So Deepliner, I would say the first time I ever learned about Deepliner, the guy Jeff, who one of the guys I learned from, Jeff was the first person I ever saw that had Deepliner rods, and like I didn't pay much attention to it. Like this is way back. Um, then if you guys have seen like Japanese angler secrets, like he talks a lot about seafloor control, and Deepliner was another product on there. Um, I don't know what made me get it, but I remember the first time I bought one, and I was like, man, it makes jigging so easy. And so like I always wanted the high end. And when I was starting to buy rods, like Deepliner was one of those high end products. And so like I bought a couple of deep liners. I bought a Power 6 and a Power 10 and was pretty much just fishing the East Coast with those, with where there's a lot of current, but I could do a lot with just those two powers. Then I branched off into like all the other rods. Like I had at one point, I think I had like 65 rods. I had
You say
all the deep liners.
65
Yeah,
rods.
so I had all the deep liners, all the Nagis, multiple Takama Technos, Shimano's highest end rod, the Ocean Jigger Limited, had the Daiwa Salt, the 55s, the solid blank you guys are all using in Texas, um, Evergreen Poseidons, just all like the higher end stuff, and I fished all of them. And what I like about Deepliner, like before I knew about Deepliner, like as the company, Deepliner is the only company that offers every single power, like from power 0 to now power 14. And to me, when I see a company that is that detailed, I'm like, okay, that company is like what I want to use because like there's the room for fine adjustments that some of the other companies don't quite have. Like when I see a company have only three models, it's just not in depth enough for me.
So I got one. I think you and William and G are competing for most rods. I think you guys can have that battle of who has the
I'm sure
bigger
he
sword
does.
sport. Second, though,
Yeah, Will's an
so
animal.
you have 65 rods. How are you able to work through them to know that like deep line separate them? With that many rods, how are you able to use them enough to kind of know that like start weaning out or thinning out the herd of moving towards this one rod? Like how are you able to fish them long enough or kind of put them through the thing that you realize that they weren't the ones?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like for me, I'm looking for a very particular feel when I'm jigging. Um, and so like I would just leave one set at home and go to a next set. Take that set out. I might even fish that rod one day. It might only take one day to be like, nope, this isn't it. And yeah, I mean, just the deep liner is what set. Like the other rod that I probably fished the most outside of deep liner was the Ocean Jigger Infinity Limited. The only thing negative I have to say about it is that it was 6'2" in length. Or I shouldn't even say it's a negative. A negative for me is that it was over 6 foot in length. And like the deep liner had the at the time the 55 option, so 5.5 foot basically. And so just
So did you
the
immediately go with
feel.
shorter rods or did you ever use longer rods?
No.
Because I was getting tradition to that about the traditional rods versus more of the Americans being longer.
Yeah, no, I fished, like I said, I had the Evergreen Poseidons. I want to say they're 6'3". The Ocean Jigger Limited is 6'2". I even tested a Temple Reef Innovate, which is like 8 foot long. Um, yeah, but just the I've tested them all pretty much at this point, and I think for me, I think 5.5 foot is the best all around length for me. I would say like for most people, 6 foot is probably ideal. Like the rods I fish now are only 5 foot long.
So that was gonna be my next question. If say you and like Benny everybody are experts, right? So somebody who's mid-level to more beginner, you think that more 6 foot is a more forgiving length for them to go with if somebody's looking into moving into rods for the first time or been jigging for a year or two?
I wouldn't say it's more forgiving. I would say the only way or I would say forgiving in a mobility point around the boat. So, like even with the 5 foot rods, if you happen to hook a tuna or something like that, if the boat's just kind of out of position a little bit and you need to get around the stern or the bow, obviously 5 foot's not much room to work with. If you're not a person who's too mobile and can get around the boat very easily, I don't recommend going 5 foot. 5.5 is still kind of iffy. 6 foot, I think, is the perfect length just because it gives you the mobility to get around people, around the motors, around the bow, and still not beat you up too bad jigging all day.
I know you said that deep liner like the Prime or the Logic, right? Or the
Yeah,
Cadillac
logical.
of which is the Logic or like the Cadillac of rod. Does deep liner make any more, I guess, moderate or mid-level for it? If somebody's wanting to get into deep liner, is it all or nothing? Are you going to the deep
So
end for
deep
it, or is there
liner,
any way to get into it more shallow?
so deep liner is kind of and deep liner is its own company or its own brand. Deep liner is under an umbrella called Deepar's Factory. You have Deep liner, which is the flagship. Then you have Garage Nagi, which is a totally separate. It's a totally separate brand. It's not Deepliner, but they are still operated out of the Deepliner company. Another high-end product, two-piece rod, use different guides. They're 6 foot in length. They're working on a shorter model. Then you have a brand called Kojant, and Kojant is the cheaper version. Um, I want to say that, not sure where they're made. I think they might actually be a company made in China, just to get that price way down. Um, they'll have lower end componentry, obviously. I haven't fished them, so I couldn't tell you what they're like or anything. But I do know that that's kind of like their budget brand. Once again, that's not Deepliner,
Yeah.
Kojant, Garage Nagi, Deepliner, all separate, just operated out of the same umbrella.
No, we really appreciate it because not everybody can necessarily immediately go out and afford buying deep liner. So I always try
Oh,
to
totally.
ask for the more uh, budget-friendly options for somebody who's trying to move over to
But
something else for it.
I will say, like, I hear like it's expensive. I'm I'm a firm believer in, like, the buy once, cry once type
Yeah.
thing. I see so many people go out and spend even for like 350, $400, stuff like that. And for not much more, you can get essentially the best of the best, whether it's Deepliner, Shimano's high end, Daiwa's high end, doesn't matter. I mean, once you jig like with a super cheap rod, you're like, yep, this is for me. I would say go into something higher end, just so you immediately are like working with some of the best stuff, and you just get it's more the higher end stuff just makes jigging more comfortable. Like I can jig all day long, no matter how deep we are, and not feel beat up at the end of the day.
No, that makes sense. The thing we run into here, what I've noticed is we talked about it with Benny too. It's the people haven't fully invested into it. So if they have a little bit of a bad day, they might move over to bait. So it's trying to get people to move into it, have confidence on spend a ton so they can see it works. We
Hmm.
have some people that are still hesitant for it, so they don't want to spend a ton. But we try to encourage people to get quality product, and then it's trying to find that threshold between dollar and value. So that's why I was asking for a couple other options.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just comes down to what you want. If you're just like, I would say make the investment if you know this is kind of what you're going to go into. Like for me at this point, like I have no interest in any other kind of fishing. It's jigging only 100% of the time. Um, I don't use any electric stuff. There's no bait. There's none of that stuff. I see you smiling. Yeah.
That was going to be another conversation. We
Oh,
were going to move into
yeah,
the no
you don't
electric
want to get
thing.
into
So.
that one. Yeah.
No, everything's open. I was going to ask you the next one. It's like we're going to discuss deep liner. I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to tell us about it, and then your
Yeah, but
thoughts on straight
I'll,
guides, and then everything for it. So we
I'll tell
got
you a
plenty of
little
time
bit
to talk.
more about Deepliner though. So Deepliner's been around since 2007. The guy who created slow jigging, like you'll see a lot of people say in the US, like, we've been doing this for 30, 40 years and all these fancy, they're full of shit. The stuff that the guys are doing in Japan versus guys who are bouncing bucktails in like the Key West 40 years ago is totally different. So, uh, Sato, the creator, and it's Norihiro Sato in Japan, is the guy who created it. He only taught three people everything he knows about slow jigging. One is the owner of Deepliner, one is the owner of Seafloor Control. The other guy, I can't remember. I don't think he owns the company. I think he was just a friend of his. Um, and the Deepliner guy, it's Masayoshi Higashimura is his name, and he's the best jig fisherman I've ever seen, and widely known as the best jig fisherman in all of Japan. And so what I like about Deepliner is like if the stuff is good enough for him, easily good enough for me. And like after meeting him and see how in detailed he is with everything, I'm like, okay, well, no wonder he has 14 powers of rods. He has size 5 foot, size 5.5, 6 foot, 7 foot. Then he's got a whole high pitch series called Mania Fellows that go from 4 foot to 6 foot. So he covers every single type of slow jigging or high pitch jigging that you could want to do. And everything is tested on the water by him, by no one else. He owns a charter company in Miroto, Japan, and one is for the charters, also so he can go out and test the products himself. That product does not get released for multiple years after testing, whether it's the Terra, the rods, the jigs. Like he came here and came fishing with us down here. he brought a jig out with him one day, and he was crushing it on it. I was like, "How long have you had that in development?" And he said 4 years. And so like, it's not a guy that's just looking to make money. It's a guy that's looking to put the best product out there for him, not even so much for the customer. It's like he wants it to be the way he wants it, and he only wants customers who really appreciate slow jigging, understand slow jigging, and is kind of catering towards that higher end market of clientele. So, I mean, it's just everything about that company is like exactly what I was looking for.
He says he almost sounds like the Ferrari world, like right. Ferrari builds it for a very specific client, and there's special rules or whatnot that kind of go
Mhm.
along with it. That remind me of.
Yeah, I mean, if you're someone that wants to pump on the fish, high stick, try to boat flip them, Deepliner is not for you. But if you're someone who wants to cater towards, if you're someone who likes to jig very deep water, or looking for the most sensitive rod option that is available, Deepliner is the best, hands down. And that's not just because I'm with them. It's like everything I've tested, there's no one that builds a more sensitive rod.
No, I believe you on that one for like the. That's why I was giving you the floor to talk about it for. We want to hear about new companies, and then ones that are evened out. If somebody was hesitant to buy it before because they're hearing it from somebody who actually uses something, they might buy them now, right? So that somebody goes in, didn't want to spend it, but if they have a legit reason to spend a little bit more for it, it makes sense to then upgrade to it.
Yeah, I
But I
mean, we
want everybody to be
definitely.
aware of. But
I was gonna say it's good because right now we're seeing Deepliner growth here in the USA. Like they kind of brought me in to kind of represent Deepliner here. They also brought Josh Hanna in to represent Garage Nagi, and both those brands you can start to see them start to kind of blossom a little bit more. I know there's been a lot more Deepliners rods sold, a lot more jigs being sold, and so it's cool to see it's starting to spread.
no, they're beautiful rods for it too. And only thing I warn everybody for too is I've talked to Chad a ton about these rods. Be very careful with them if you do buy one. He mentioned high sticking, immediate no go. And then also that their guides are very, very small. So make sure that you're not. And I measured one. A Trinity's guides are actually 20% bigger from outside diameter compared to a deep liner. So
Yeah.
that immediately told me, and that's only the third guide. So you can
Which
imagine how
part?
much.
Which part did you measure? The inner diameter or the outside diameter?
I didn't want to mess with the inside because I was afraid I was going to nick anything. So it's outside diameter. So the inside diameter obviously is going to be different, but outside diameter was 20% smaller.
Gotcha, because the guides that Deepliner run, they're titanium torzite, so you can usually compare those to like titanium SIC
Yeah.
guides. You can get away with a smaller torzite guide and have the same opening as an SIC guide. So the guides that are on those rods they're very small, like that for a reason. They get the line as close to the blank as possible for the utmost sensitivity. But yeah, if you're someone who runs like 40-pound braid, 80-pound leader, and you're not using like a super clean PR knot, that's not the way.
So Brian asked the question that I was going to transition to. He said, acid wrap or straight. I already know the answer, but I'm going to let you take the floor on this one for it and explain to everybody your preference and the reason why you went with that one. So, Brian,
Yeah,
this one's for you.
so if I see the first thing, like let's say I'm walking around a fishing show, right? If I see a rod with spiral wrap guides, I'm not even going to look at it. I'm not going to pick it up. To me, spiral wrap has zero place in the world of slow jigging. And I'm pretty outspoken about that. So any custom rod builder is going to tell you opposite, just because of like the torque it can put on the blink. But if you're fighting a fish and slow jigging the correct way, or what would be like the correct way, you're not going to have that torque on the rod. So there's not going to be any twist. And so not only that, but I see a lot of people say like a beginner should use acid wrap. Problem when you start someone with an acid wrap rod is it immediately teaches them a bad habit, which is they lift the rod and they drop it super quick and they try to get like so much slack in the line. And that does two things. One, it teaches them a bad habit to where if they ever transition to a higher end straight guide rod, it's going to cause them to tip wrap. They might break the rod. They might rip a guide off. Not only that, but now they have so much line pile. I'm not even going to look at his yet.
That's why I was
You know,
laughing. You
yeah,
probably.
when you drop the rod tip so quickly and the line piles up on the water, you can't register when there's a bite because you can't monitor what the line is really doing. So it teaches you two two problems pretty much right off the get-go. So I don't think spiral wrap has a purpose. And then also in testing spiral wrap, when the line transitions around the blank, we want to keep that line as close to the blank as possible for the most amount of sensitivity. Most of the companies that are out there that are selling spiral wrap rods are already using large guides. So when the line goes around and you're using a large guide, that line might be a half an inch away from the blank. You're losing sensitivity, in my opinion, and based on what I've tested. So I'm totally against spiral wrap.
So Derek wants to know with the straight guides, can you feel if it's a big amberjack or a grouper eagle?
I knew he was going to go there. He's just mad because I'm out fishing them lately.
No, so that's a great transition. So let's kind of keep going down the rod route for us. And we're already in this one. We know that very traditional, we're going to keep straight guides. You want almost nothing on your rod. So you're very much a proponent of no, which leads into a product you just released, no baseball grips or any kind of grips or anything on your rods to kind of increase sensitivity. Can you go a little bit more into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I honestly think I might be the first person to use the tennis wrap on rods. So I've used it from like when I was a kid because I'm so super OCD that even on my old like speed jigging rods, I would wrap it. And then I like started putting on my slow jigging rods just because it wasn't like decoratory. I just wanted to protect the rod
Mhm.
because if I get a scratch on something, I'm selling it. Like I'm that OCD. And
You
so
need to scratch one of your tears in.
oh yeah, right. But yeah, I mean, any wrap you put on the rod, like I use the wrap, but I mean, I'm definitely going to lose some feel from that. It's also going to change the action of the blank. Anything that you add to the butt section of the rod, whether it's tape, whether it's tennis wrap, whether you know it or not, you're changing the action of that rod if you're using a rod that should naturally bend through the reel seat and into the butt section, which most slow jigging rods should be doing that.
And
And
so
then as
because,
far as
good.
one more thing, and then like um, I think you've got your deep liner rod now, but if you
Mhm.
like a lot of the rods out there have either a painted blank, like whether they use urethane or I'm not sure what coating. I want the blank to be sanded. I don't want there to be any epoxy on the blank, as little as possible. The guides, I don't want to see double-footed guides. I don't want to see a lot of excess epoxy buildup on the wraps on the guides. I want everything as light and as minimal as possible.
So Chad kind of alluded to it. I even went to it. So I picked up a deep liner. And then I'm going to check it out for it because one, Chad uses them too. And then I talked to Joe Vito. I talked to him for quite a while about it. Everything Chad told me, Joe Vito said basically word for word. So I actually have one. So I will be hopefully testing it out on some of the upcoming trips. So I can't wait to put it to use
And
for it. It'll be
yeah, I
added
mean
to a little bit of the arsenal of support.
they just make it so easy, man. Like it's ridiculous.
So staying on the rod stuff, what are some other things that people are doing incorrectly in your opinion? So, right, first one is one, rods are too long. Two, potentially wrapping it. Three, straight. I mean, spiral versus straight. Is there anything else that people could avoid that they're doing?
I think you see a lot of decoratory stuff. I shouldn't say decoratory, but like when it comes to grips on the reel seat, I think people go overboard on the grips on a reel seat. They make them either too large, funky shapes, that don't really serve a purpose other than aesthetics, which is it's totally fine. It's this is all just what I like in my opinion.
Yeah.
I want the most minimal of everything. Some of the grips out there are super tall. Some have lock nuts. Um, some have just too much decoratory stuff. So I like to see that as minimal as possible. What else? I don't like to see, like if we're talking standard slow jigging, I don't want to see double-footed guides on a rod because it stiffens it up so much. Um,
I didn't know
large
that. I was
guide.
going to ask you why no double footed guides, but that makes more sense than it makes it stiffer.
Yeah, I mean it's just you're spreading it out. You've got epoxy and wrap over a longer length. As it gets into that blank, you're putting like stiff points in that tip section area, and that can definitely change the action of the blank, which is totally fine, like if that's what you're going for. But if you're talking like those minimal adjustments, let's say like that Deepliner has, those can change that. And so what the rod was technically like, you wouldn't want to buy a Deepliner rod add double-footed guides on it because now the ratings and how it's supposed to work might change. Now, if the person building the rod is aware of that and can design the blank around that, it's not so much of an issue. But generally, you're only going to see, that's one of the reasons you're going to see double-footed guides on like high pitch style rods because it stiffens it up and can help out with that punch. And so you can kind of get away with it. But as far as slow jigging, where feel is everything, I don't recommend it. But that's just me.
So you got your high-end rod, right? You go fishing all day. When you come back, how are you maintaining it, or what are you doing? Are you washing it off? Like, what are you doing to take care of your rods when you get home? I know they're titanium, but I still feel like you're probably doing something to them, just so in case everybody's aware. If they do get these, kind of, what do you prefer to do them when you get back home?
Yeah, I mean, usually I'll obviously spray them off at the dock when I get back home, throw them in the shower, spray them down with hot water. If you see water spots or any salt settling, you can just put some soap in there and kind of get it out of there. With the titanium Torzite guides, you're not going to have any rusting at all, so you don't got to worry about that. Um, if you're someone who's gonna like go fishing all day and store them for like a couple months, never a bad idea to like spray some WD-40 on a towel, wipe them down just for the peace of mind. But I would say for the guys that use stainless guides and stuff like that, that's something you should be doing.
You want to start talking about your favorite reel now? I was going to cover some of the Deepliner stuff and then move into technique for it. I was going to cover the gear and then kind of how we put the gear to use for it. So
Yeah, no problem.
everybody, or most people, if you know, seen the reels you use, and yours are special. Same with William and G. I like y'all's because of the color combos y'all went with for them too. But
Also, no, I only had that one custom one done and I sold it to Will.
oh, I've seen. I fished next to him with it. That
Yeah,
black and red one is
yeah, I had
beautiful. So I
that one
thought you
done.
wanted one too. So you want us to tell a bit about Deepliner's reels? Because I don't think a lot of newbies always know the reels for it too, and what makes this reel that looks very unassuming so special.
Yeah, so I mean the Terra is built to be kind of the trend in Japan right now for like the more I guess boutique manufacturers and boutique um, type sellers is taking a step back, which is for a while there's like there's reels that have so many parts in them, and the more parts they're able to make the reel actually feel very very smooth, but at the same time it could take away the feel that's in the reel because now you've got more weight. There's more stuff in between the handle and the actual gear, and you might just not get all the feel out of the reel. The Terra is built with the most minimalistic of design, minimum parts. The main gear is kind of more into the body, get your hand closer to the reel, very easy to turn. So they were able to get rid of parts while keeping it smooth and give you the most amount of sensitivity within the reel. And so, like, if you were to get a Terra, the one thing you're going to see is the handle. The handle's made of plastic, and you're like, what the hell is this plastic handle on this expensive reel? So, if you were to take that handle off, put a cork handle on or an Evafoam handle, go fishing for a day, or even have those two, like, let's say you had two of them, you put a cork handle on one, plastic on the other, guarantee you by the end of the day, you're fishing that plastic handle. That plastic handle design where it's hollowed out, you can feel everything that's going on. And so, once again, going back to Higashimura and like the best jig fisherman essentially there is, that reel was tested for like 4 years before it was released, like refining it. And so that reel is just like the most finely tuned slow jigging specific reel made. It's not made for bait fishing. It's not made for trolling. It's made for slow jigging only. Got a cork drag in it, which allows like a very easy release of the drag. Um, I mean, just it's a sick reel, man. So I actually saw it the first or the second time I went to Deepliner in Japan, and at the time I was fishing Osha jiggers, which is another great reel. Like I would say, outside of the like expensive reel being the Terra, if I were to recommend anyone, I would say the Shimano Osha, the Star Drag version, is probably one of the best reels ever made. Take that reel, put a long arm on it or a long arm on the reel. For that value, it's very tough to beat. If you want to go for high end, I think the Terra is the best. I tested it back then, and like I remember I had that reel on the prototype Prime 50 deep liner, and I didn't want to put the setup down like all 3 days. Like I left everything left everything to the side, and only fished that one prototype out on the boat the whole trip. And now I've got them all. So
So one thing that I noticed too in that reel, which I thought was crazy, and you actually explained it to me, and same with Greg Smith, was the way the drag set, right? We
Mhm.
discussed that there is no
Oh yeah,
strike or pull
good point.
setting for it. Like when you do it, it's so detailed and where it's basically designed to set up for your hands. Wherever your thumb stops is
Yeah.
kind of where you should be.
So the good thing about I've got the Terra here actually, but like let's say let me take it off this rod really quick. All right, one moment. Like let me back up here. The good thing about the Terra too is like you can reach the lever with your left hand on the reel. So similar to like a star drag, when you hit the bottom, you just reel and engage. Well, this, since like as soon as you hit the bottom, you can engage it with your hand on the reel. So they just work in tandem. So you never have to sit on the bottom too long. So this lever being just easy to reach is one of the main features. But also, like you said, there's no indentations anywhere here. So obviously, like if you have an indentation, let's take like Marfix for example. Each little indent is technically like a preset drag setting. Well, in the middle of a fight, you might need to make the most minuscule of adjustments. Like it doesn't take much. And so I personally really like that there is no indentations and that I can make those fine drag adjustments during the fight and not have anything in the way. Like no matter how light the click is, I just personally don't like it. So for
Mhm.
me, I really enjoy this. So
It's a beauty for everybody watching. If you fish deep, that reel is beautiful because it's 1,200 meters, isn't it?
uh so that reel, like it's great to fish shallow or deep because even like so this reel with the stock spool will hold 1,200 like roughly 1,200 yards or 1,100 yards of 20-pound braid. They also make two different shallow spools. They make a what would be PE 2.5, which would be basically like 20-pound USA. They make a 600-meter spool for that, so 656 yards. And they also make a red spool, which is for PE2, which is 15-pound US braid, holds 656 yards as well. And so you can change those spools depending on what you want to do. So, like what I'll do is I usually bring six of them with me on a trip. I'll have I'll have three of them with stock spools. I'll have three of them with the red spools, and I've used the red spools with PE2 up to like 1,100 foot.
Only six. Only
Oh, I've
six.
got eight.
Like, okay. You don't have
Or no,
yourself to do like
I think I got 10 now. Yeah, I think I'm up to 10 now.
just kind of like laying around your house, like, oh, I found one. I forgot I had this one.
No, man. Well, like I said, when I get into something, dude, I go full bore. I'll spend way too much money. So like before I was even partnered up with Deepliner, I had like a full set of the Logical Prime 50s. I had a full set of the 55s, a full set of the 60s. Like I went through them all.
So I know you sell one if it gets one scratch on it. So I need you to
Yeah.
scratch one twice, two scratches, so I don't get that one from you.
Yeah, right.
All
It'll
right,
happen
so
eventually.
this is a beautiful setup. So we understand the rods and the reels you're using. Now the nice transition is kind of technique, what everybody's been asking
Mhm.
about. This has been the questions I've been asked the most. Oh, let's do another easy one right now. You've been coaching me on this one. Single assist hook versus doubles, right? So we've got our
Mhm.
jig, singles on top and bottom versus doubles, and maybe explain why you choose what, and then we'll kind of problem shoot a couple items I know that'll come up.
So we'll talk kind of go in the past a little bit where a lot of the charter boats that I would fish on didn't like dual hooks top and bottom just because of the likelihood of the mate getting hooked. And so for a long time there, I was fishing like when I first like I'm not with Van Fook anymore, but when I was using their jigging, I think a jig and grippy like single top and bottom exclusively. Like I didn't fish any duals. There was a benefit to where if you ever hung bottom, it was a lot easier to get off.
Mhm.
Um, Also, you don't have to worry about hooking the mate as much. But the thing I noticed is like some of the days, like I'd miss bites consistently, and so my hookup ratio just wasn't that great. So nowadays, I fish dual hooks essentially 100% of the time. The only time for me that I would consider fishing singles were if I was going to fish super deep, like I throw the number around occasionally, but at this point, realistically, maybe like 1,500 foot plus, and I was after a target that's going to have a larger maybe harder mouth that I need to penetrate. So the single hooks, like the larger singles, like let me ask you, what do you think is going to penetrate easier? A big single or a very light hook, like thin gauge hook?
I'm going with thin gauge because it's basically almost like a hypodermic needle going in.
Okay, so that's what a lot of people would say, but it's actually the opposite because there's not a lot of mass behind that thin gauge. So if you're fishing super deep and you try to apply pressure, that hook will actually give and bend.
That
So
makes
deeper water, the singles work better because there's more mass behind the hook point where it can penetrate easier with less pressure. So just the slight bit of jig movement has enough pressure to pull that hook into place. So fishing very deep water is where I would fish singles. You want to make sure that the hook you're using has like a long, slow taper, similar to like a Gamakatsu 620, I think it is, or a seafloor control jam hook. Singles, they've got a very slow taper point. And so if you're fishing like super deep water, they can have a benefit. If you're fishing, I don't know, let's say for most people less than 1,200 foot, there's nothing, you're not going to lose any advantage using singles, or I'm sorry, lose using duals. So I would say try duals, try singles, but for me, duals work best for hookup ratio. And I also like I can use like a fine balance of like the Van Fook 4.0 is what I use a lot of because it doesn't have a lot of flex. I feel like I get a good hookup ratio. Once it digs in, I don't feel like I ever have any trouble. Let's see what Benny said.
Yeah, I was reading that writing down his question for it. I was surprised he threw one in there, so we're definitely going to address that one. I was trying to get through the ones I know were low hanging fruit versus the one that I know that's going to be a very in depth one for it. So, follow up before we get to Benny's question is a lot of you guys are afraid of duels because of hang up on bottom, and you kind of address that. How can kind of newbies, more experienced people avoid, and I guess I've even seen some more experienced people avoid catching bottom or whatnot for it? Like, what are some of the tips and tricks you think to kind of, or techniques that would help them focus in on not hanging up as much?
I mean, first of all, like if you're fishing in a sticky bottom area, nothing you can do to avoid it. I mean, you're gonna hang up, and we're dropping the jig to the bottom. No matter how fast you are off the bottom, it's gonna grab sometimes. The biggest thing I see people do that's essentially wrong is immediately try to use the rod to get it off. As soon as you try to get the rod to get it off of there, it's going to be very difficult to get it back off. The trick to getting a jig hung, like if you feel it stick at all, don't try jerking it off the bottom. Put your reel in free spool, wrap your line around your hand, and just slowly bounce the jig. 90% of the time, it's going to pop off the bottom. The only thing you can kind of do to mitigate hanging bottom is your hook shape. So a lot of people just buy like a random hook from Alibaba, AliExpress, and not really understand like hook shapes. What you want is like let's say you have like the point, let's say this is like the top of the hook, like the top of the shank. You want the barb of the hook ideally pointed at like the spade or the eye of the hook. If you get it to where the hook point is out this way, you're going to grab bottom way more. If it's closer to the shank, it's not a circle hook, but the tip just kind of points here. It doesn't hang as much as what Sato learned out. That's why a lot of the traditional slow jigging hooks you're going to see are kind of more rounded like this, and that's just to prevent hanging bottom as much, from what I understand.
You did a good thing that how this came up was months ago. I did a trip with some of the members here. We did a down the bayou trip,
Hmm.
and my hookups were garbage. We had a full conversation. I called you pretty quickly, Chad. I was like, "Hey, you don't know me, but can you help me some
Hmm.
with?" And you kind of walked through very. You grabbed a hook and ran it over your arm or your hand. I don't know if you remember that to show me how it
Hmm.
catches. And that was one of the neat things that I tell everybody is just kind of play with the hooks and see how it catches if you're trying to drag it across something. And that's kind of a good idea to see what it catch for it and things like that, which I thought was a genius idea.
Yeah, I mean, so the second time I went to Japan, I actually went to the creator dude, Sato. I went to his house and spent 3 days with him at his house and had like, I mean, we would talk jigging from like 7 a.m. till 3 a.m. the next morning, just going full in depth. And one of the interesting things he showed me was like an eyed hook versus a spade hook. And if you took an eyed hook and like ran it off the side, for whatever reason, like the eye just didn't want to, the hook didn't want to roll over and get the point in your hand. But with the spade hook, almost every time it rolled off, it dug in, like the point tip dug in, or the hook point dug in. And so one thing people should consider is maybe testing out spade hooks versus eyed hooks and see if you notice a difference in hookup ratio as well.
So I guess are you more pro spade after that conversation? I'm guessing what you're
Yeah,
saying, it kind of sounds like it digs in
at
more.
At this point, I use spade exclusively, unless I was going to use a big single hook. I think a lot of it just the way like a spade hook is like the top of the spade usually faced like this, and the cord comes out the top. And I think it just gives the hook kind of more freedom to hang around. Versus if you have an eyed hook, it just kind of, and Derek and Joe are going to get sexual on this one, so be aware. But like if the cord runs through, it kind of locks the hook in place, and it doesn't have as much free play. Not saying you're not going to catch fish. Plenty of people catch fish on singles all the time, but there's no telling if you were going to catch more or have a better hookup ratio with a spade hook.
So a rookie move that I learned that Chad caught very quickly. I was on a trip, same trip. I bent the shit out of something. We don't know. I called Chad very quickly, sent him a photo. Is when you're tying those, make sure that the cord is going in front of the spade. Do not let it go behind it, because
Yeah,
that is the big rookie move that I learned. And I actually recently cut all of mine off that I redid that and
happens a
fixed it.
lot. Yeah, it happens to everyone. Yeah, just yeah, when it's kind of behind the spade, kind of acts as a lever and can actually bend the hook or just pry the hook out. So it being in front of the spade, it'll drive the hook into the body or the mouth a lot better.
When you tie it, it looks cleaner behind it, but it actually, you can see when you put it on and you tie it, it creates a
Can
fulcrum.
actually it can actually cut the cord too on top of the spade if you're not careful.
Yeah.
So
All right, so now we can get to the bread and butter and kind of go through one of the questions that Benny had. And this is something that everybody's been asking about, is technique, right? So we covered hooks, we covered the gear, whatnot for it. He said, I'm interested to hear Chad's opinion on his focus while pitching. What percentage would you think you focus on the fall versus the retrieve? And how has that focus changed at all the longer you've been jigging? Which is a great question.
I kind of give really like a ratio, but I would say when I first started, I do what I see most people do now, which is you see pretty much everyone that's just starting. Oh, I need to let my dog. Sorry,
Yeah.
guys, I gotta let my dog out really quick. Daisy, come here. Come on, Daisy. You want to watch her a second? Sorry about that.
No, don't apologize for it.
So I would say, like
We
pretty
had
much,
Benny's cat in the last video.
I got two of them, two little wiener dogs. But so I think one thing, and no fault to the people out there, like I did this too, and I think everyone does, is that everyone only focuses on the fall of a jig, when a lot of the jigs that people are using are designed to be fished on the upward movement. And so constantly throughout the day, like I'm going to be working that jig up. The biggest thing though is knowing how to get the action out of the jig that you want. So a lot of people will like pitch the rod up and reel on the way down, which is okay sometimes, but let's say you're using like a longer jig, for example, like a Deepliner Spinero, a Deepliner Mega Spindle. As you're lifting, you give it some power with the reel, and that'll punch the jig to the side, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you're essentially loading the rod up and letting it kick left or right. And so those jigs are designed to slide. So you should be mixing all those motions in there. So depending on the target of the day, I'm going to change that around, or based on like when I'm fishing on the boat, I'm usually fishing with the same group of guys. Before we all drop, we know what jig everyone's using. We're rarely using the same jigs. I'll watch everyone on the boat. If someone's getting a hit, I'm looking at the technique they're doing, and I'm going to make the change I need to. Um, and yeah, so I guess to answer Benny's question, I would say nowadays I focus on the retrieve probably 60 or 70% of the time more so than the fall.
So I know we kind of talked about this before, and I made the point, and you kind of agree with it. It could be a broad statement for it. I feel like most guys now are more long fall fishermen. That's what we kind of discussed a little bit before. It's like just lifting it, kind of letting it fall, and
Well,
then
that's just
the evolution.
it's not even the evolution. So like tradition, like if you were to watch like Sato or Higashimura or like some of like the true experts in the world, you would watch them like based on the stuff that's on YouTube that we have. You would watch it be like, oh, that's not slow jigging at all. But it's actually like that's the way they designed it, the way the jigs are designed. There are certain jigs that are designed with a basic long fall motion. That's why companies like Evergreen and Deepliner make rods that are 7 foot to apply a long fall to some of their jigs. But a lot of the jigs are meant to be fished on the up. Um, so I would say 99% of the people jigging in the US are doing one motion and one motion only. Not saying they're not going to catch fish. People catch fish all the time. The US fishery is that good to where you're gonna catch no matter what. The thing is though is like let's say you go out there and you have a bad day. You're just gonna be like, oh, the fishing was bad, versus you didn't know all the different techniques that you could have tried, whether it would have made a difference or not. There's a lot of other techniques out there that could have been applied to try to change that day. And not only that, but another big problem I see is that people, and you see the question all the time where they're, what rod should I get for this depth, this jig, and so on. And they'll go off of the company's like gram rating. Those gram ratings mean, like in my opinion, almost nothing. Okay, so you need to look at rods where you got to look at for like the action that you want in that depth. Just because I have a rod that's rated for 1,000 grams, don't mean that I can't use that rod in only 200 foot. And I can also use a rod that's rated for 200 grams in 1,000 foot of water, just depending on the action that I want. Let's say I want the jig moving faster. I can use a rod rated for 800 grams and 300 foot of water with a 300-gram jig to get that fast action on the upwards movement that I'm wanting to. Just the opposite, if I'm targeting like an Alfonzino or something like very deep, you can go to like a power 4 or a power 6 that's rated for only 400 grams, put 6 or 700 grams on it, and make that jig barely move in the deep water. You're not going to blow the rod up or anything. It's just you're just changing the tone of the jig depending on the depth.
So that's a great question. And so let's ask this one. You've set me up for this. You have these two options. When are you using those two? Like when would you, like when you're out there, when are you
Mhm.
going with a heavier rod with a lighter jig to get more of a quicker action? And then when are you using maybe a lighter rod with a heavier jig to get that slower action? Hopefully I said that right.
Yeah, it's kind of just based on the day. So for example, last time I was in Japan, I was fishing with like 8 other people. We were in 1,200 foot of water. Everyone was fishing either power 4 or power 6, which if you were to look at the gram ratings, you'd be like, oh, that rod's way too light. They were all fishing those rods 200 grams heavier than what they were rated for. They weren't getting the reactions that well. So what I did is I went to a rod that's rated for 1,100 grams, and I used like 350 and 400 grams to get more of a punch deeper in the like in that deep water, and I was getting the bite. Now, just the opposite, if they were using a heavier rod and I was using lighter, I would make that change if they were getting reactions and I wasn't. So a lot of it is just based on the day. Like if you can start the day with like a medium tone action, which is kind of what everyone is used to. Like the rod, you load it and it unloads very like in a very like medium type tone. If it's not getting a reaction, you've got to make a change. You can make that change in two ways. You can either go way heavier on the jig, or you can keep that same jig weight and go to a very light rod. Um, Another thing I see people do is they constantly try to get away with the lightest jig they can for no other reason than just they want to fish as light as possible. There's days I might be fishing 300 or 400 foot of water in the Gulf when we have no current, and I'm still using 400 grams. There might be days in 1,000 foot of water where I'm using 300 grams. So don't be scared to try all these different options, because you might be missing out on a great bite.
I was laughing because that's a recent conversation is exactly that. Everybody keeps preaching. They want to fish as light as possible. They want to fish as light as possible, which is good for fishing light. But what you just said, you might be missing an action because you're just going light. You might be missing the complete opposite action, which might be the effective that day for it.
Well, I think that's where gear has the biggest thing, and like even we'll kind of transition like into the electric thing a little bit. You see a lot of people using electrics just because they think that's what's tiring them out is the reeling it up, but, but it's not. It's the rod that you're using. I would argue the rod that you're using can really, really take a toll on you throughout the day to where now it makes reeling up very tiring because you've used all that energy in a jigging with the rod that kind of is taxing on your body. Because jigging 1,000 foot with a manual reel is not bad at all, but you need to have the right rod paired with it to be able to do that all day functionally. And I understand there's people out there that have, whether it's bad shoulders, they're older, for whatever reason, but I see younger people doing it in like sub 500 foot. And I'm like, man, like, what are you doing? So like I think people should just kind of step up the rods they're using, try a shorter rod out deep. I see a lot of I see information out there that says like the deeper you go, the longer the rod, and I think that's completely opposite. And deeper you go, the shorter the rod. You're going to be able to make a consistent movement with that shorter rod throughout the day versus if you have a super long rod, it's going to start wearing you out to where you can't even lift that thing much anymore.
So I write down my next question for it. So you gave two different scenarios a second ago, right? You said,
Mhm.
and this is something that Mike and a few of the other guys and Colin, a few of the members asked me about, like you're having a bad day. Bite's not working for you initially, because you called it your pilot jig, right? That's what we described it earlier in our conversations before, right? So it's not working. How are
Mhm.
you knowing, or how are you feeling through your process of changing rods versus changing jig? Like you have two different ways of kind of getting a different type
Well,
of
you kind
action
of
out of something.
it's totally up to you which direction you want to go. Generally, I'm going to start with a jig change. Um, because I don't keep when I'm on the boat, I don't keep reels on my rods. Like I'll use one reel all day unless I get broke off on that reel. So I have all my empty rods just kind of up stored. So I'm going to start with the jig, and then if I'm still not getting bites after changing multiple different jigs and weights and stuff, then I'm going to go kind of what I would consider drastic, which is changing the rod, and then you can run back through those jigs again. Not saying it's going to make the difference, but at least you're trying. But like for example, like I was fishing with my buddy Josh Hanna not long ago, and I was using a Power 8 rod. He was using Power 6. He was getting reactions, and I wasn't. And we were using the same gram jig. I switched to the lighter rod, and immediately you'll start getting reactions. So literally, those tiny adjustments that you might not think make a difference can make all the difference in the world sometimes.
So okay, so we're going to stay on the jig category for it then, right? We've discussed that everybody has their go-to, which you've described as your pilot jig.
Mhm.
You always say, "Hey, this is my like test jig that I'm gonna send out." It's not working, and we talked about almost being neutral, like almost like a torpedo, right? Because you have
Mhm.
the torpedo in the middle. We've mentioned like the Johnny jig, one drop on one side and something with a ton of flutter on the other.
Mhm.
What is your determination when you start making these changes? So everybody's aware. I know you've told me of your thought process of like how you find what the fish want that day.
I mean, generally you can tell based on like let's say we've all had those days where you drop in it, like maybe everyone hooks up right away. Those fish are very aggressive, feeding very aggressively. In that case, like I want to take advantage of their aggressive bite by trying to get them off of the bottom. So I'm going to use a jig that might have more slide to it to where I can work it on the up motion more because I want to lure that fish off the bottom to have the best chance to get them to eat maybe 10, 20 foot off the bottom. So that way I have more likelihood of landing that fish. Versus some days you might go out there, everyone drops. You can watch everyone's motions if they're being kind of fast action, and then you happen to slow it down and you get a reaction. Okay, there's a good sign that those fish are just very lethargic that day. So now you would go to something like for example, like a deep liner spindle and arrow that doesn't have like as it falls, it doesn't fall in like a very wide pattern. Just imagine you had like a 5 gallon bucket that jig would only fall within like that 5-gallon bucket mouth. So the fish doesn't have to chase it down.
Not
And so when the,
to make you get up or do anything, but do you happen to have any of these jigs semi near you so everybody
yeah,
can see some of the Deepliner jigs? If you
yeah,
don't
give me
mind
a
grabbing
second
one or two.
and I'll grab a couple like the complete
Yeah.
opposites of each other.
The reason I asked him to grab some of the jigs for everybody is I know a lot of people are stocking up for them, and it's kind of always people are very visual for it. So I like you guys to see them and kind of see because obviously if he's using the jigs, they got to be super quality as well for it. To kind of give everybody another option of jigs to go with, and you can kind of visualize what they look like. So when he's describing the pattern and whatnot for it. Please keep sending in questions or whatnot. Like I said, more. I have a whole list of stuff you guys sent me that we're working through. So, and I'm taking notes. So if anybody has any questions too, that I'm going to try to answer anything else as I can.
All right.
Appreciate everybody calling in tonight.
There's like, let's say the fish are being super lethargic, then I'm probably going to use something like the spindle narrow. So this jig, when it falls, it's not going to fall in like a super wide arc. It's just going to fall very tight. So the fish doesn't have to chase it. So if the
Can I ask you a question
fish are,
before you
yeah,
get
yeah.
too far into this?
Mhm.
So if anybody wants these jigs that he's describing, where can they get these? So when they start describing them, they know where to go and get them at.
So the best place to get them currently is in the USA is Tomo's Tackle. Tomo's Tackle just got a nice order in, and they have got a pretty good selection. Also, what's the name? E-Vike out in California. They have a couple of the other versions that Tomo's doesn't carry. So those are the two stores in the US currently that are stocking them. If you want the deep liner rods, the Fisherman's Hut has the best selection of deep liner rods here in the States. Currently, like you could order third party through the Japanese websites. Currently, though, like if you wanted to get a rod from them, shipping has changed to where shipping is like out of control. So by the time you get the rod here, you might as well just buy it in the USA. The more people that shop at the USA stores, the way better off we all are if we like the deep liner products because that gives them incentive to bring in more product. Tomo's Tackle does a very good job at keeping the price point very close to what you'd pay for from Japan. So it's great. Great option.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Chad. I just know you're
No,
going
you're
to
fine,
describe
man.
it with the jigs, and I
All
want people
good.
to be able to, like, if they're seeing it, go
Totally
buy
good,
them
dude.
while you're kind of talking for it.
But yeah, man. So like you'd have something like a spindle narrow, front weighted, so that way once the jig stops, it gets on the on its no on the side very easily, doesn't slide much. Then you have the complete opposite, which is a mega spindle, to where this jig will shoot to the side when pitched. So they have to chase it a little bit more. The good thing about this jig is when you pitch it, it has a long slide, but it will also fall very similar to the spindle narrow in that same area where it had stopped. And Deepliner has a jig to cover everything in between. So they have, I want to say, like it might be 12 or 14 different models at this point. So I would say the main two that I use like the most frequently, like in the Gulf waters, or the main three, would be this one called an FB. So,
FB.
yep, an FB. Now, one thing that is pretty crazy is like, except the very new jigs, deep liner jigs do not have weight printed on them. So when you get them, look at the package, take a Sharpie, write it on them. Seems crazy, but it is what it is. So
We
yeah,
talked about that with Vinny, that he said he looked over and you had Sharpie all over your jigs.
yeah. I mean, it's a good idea. I mean, if you're getting very, very detailed, you can weigh each jig and, see if how off they are or not. But I'm usually using FB as my pilot jig most of the days. If anyone's been on my Instagram and seen like some of the larger kitty Mitchells I've caught, a lot of those are on the Spy. It'd be the Spy V, which is considered the Spy 5. Um, Also, the Spindle Narrow is another one that I fish quite frequently. When I came out to Louisiana and fished for the Queens, I was using this Yuzu color in the Spy 5. Personally, I don't think colors matter much at all, so buy what you can.
You're ruining my future questions here by answering questions
We
already.
can answer. We can go into it later. There we
Yeah.
go. I gotta pop a new nicotine pouch for Joe Vito.
All right, so
All right, we're good. That's for
if
you, Joe.
the FP is the pilot, the Spy V, that's going to have more or less flutter?
So the Spy V wouldn't necessarily say much more
Or
flutter, but it's gonna
slide?
fall. It's gonna slide more horizontally as it falls, and
Slide.
it's gonna slide more when I pitch it on the upwards movement as well.
And then the spindle narrow, how would you describe it?
Spindle
I'm writing all this down.
narrow.
Anybody
Spindle
else?
narrow is it requires very little input to get the jig on its side. So one way you can look at different jigs is like how much movement you or how much pressure you need to apply to get that jig to get on its side to get everything out of it that you can. So the weighting on the jigs varies depending on, how easy or difficult it is to get the jig to fish the way it's supposed to. But it's very difficult to really explain it versus show it. Um, one of these days I need to do a video on it all. What's he saying?
So it was a little weak with all your importing. You got to come up with Swedish pouches.
I wouldn't be able to do this interview, Joe, if I popped one of those things in.
Your eye be twitching?
I'd pass out.
Okay.
Some of the stuff Joe takes.
So that's a great slide in for that one. Okay, so we're going to go down the next one for it. So we're going to do, I guess, pattern. You're not big on color. What's another thing you look at for these jigs for? Like, obviously, you're not looking at color for it. Color is like the last thing. Like, maybe you'll describe some. A lot of people, when they're testing these jigs, have no paint on them.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the three things that you look for? How do you rank it? I guess would be what? Are you a big glow guy?
I mean, in certain instances, yeah. I mean, I do fish glow a lot. I think with jigs, you should look at glow patterns. And instead of looking at colors, look at glow patterns. Um, some jigs have glow stripes, some have dots, some have what's called super glow, which is glow that's very bright, lasts a long time. Other jigs that have very, very minimal glow. Some jigs have blue glow. An interesting thing about blue glow is based on like when I was with Jig Pro, I was doing a lot of research like for the white crackle is like with blue glow, the basically every deep water organism glows blue, all except one that glowed yellow. Like everything down there, from what I could find, glows blue. So obviously, it's a no-brainer to have a blue glow jig. Pretty much every Japanese company will have some version of a blue glow. I personally don't fish it that much anymore. Used to fish it a lot. I don't see that big of a difference. Um, Another thing that's an option currently, not for Deepliner, but other jigs out there, is UV, just a UV coating. So any deep liner jig that you see like yellow or orange or anything, all the paint itself is all UV. So if you hit it with a black light, like it goes crazy. Um, so instead of just doing like a UV coating, they use UV paint. But there are some jigs offered by companies like Shimano that'll have just a basic silver jig that has a UV coating that once it's down there, it's technically blue light will activate the UV on it. Um, so getting back to it, I would have standard glow, like an all glow jig, stripe glow, glow dots, and then also no glow. Don't be scared to fish no glow in as deep as you go fishing. Those fish that are down there, they know that jig is there. They can feel it. So you've got hooks bouncing around, you've got the terminal tackle bouncing around. Multiple times I've caught fish in over 1,200 foot of water with jigs that have no glow at all. So don't be scared to use it.
So I give you kudos. You have the most interactive comment section of any video we've had so far, good or bad. It's the most interactive. I can tell you that.
Yeah, that's just the crew trying to mess with me.
I appreciate it. It kind of makes a little levity for it. Have you noticed any difference between the glow patterns as far as like any different type of fish that prefers like a stripe versus the dots versus the blue or anything like that? Like, have you noticed like if anybody's targeting any specific type of fish with works
I
better
can't
for them?
say I've noticed a pattern with it, to be quite honest with you. Um, I mean, I fish like nowadays, like the one I fish a lot is the Comet Glow. This is essentially just all glow, but obviously the top is going to be orange glow, the bottom is a yellow glow. Caught a ton of great fish on it. I don't think, once again, I don't think the color has much significance. I just happen to go towards like the orange and the orange colors, the gold colors. It's just every person has their preference. But I mean, I haven't noticed. But now I will say there have been days where I just know glow just doesn't get hit, and you can go to something that's more faint, like either a very short-lasting glow or no glow at all, maybe a UV coating, and then you get hit. So whether that means the glow is actually scaring the fish away or not, just I don't know what it is, but some days just no glow works the best.
The numerous stories of people saying that for it about the glow actually scares them. Everybody on the West Coast was saying don't use glow for the tuna, which is interesting because everywhere else we use them.
What's Derek
That's
saying?
actually a legit question. I don't mind that one. What's the deepest he has caught fish
In
at?
in Alaska, we jigged 2250, and I think I caught in Josh or Joe will know, but I think it was 1850 that we were actually catching.
Brian wants to know, how do you fish with Chad?
Get a lot of people wanting to. It's
Get
nothing
a
personal against anyone at all. When I fish, I usually fish with like a very select crew. It's usually me, Derek, Joe, Josh, Benny, Henry Stash. And then another guy, James. Usually when we're gonna go fishing, there's a group chat, gets sent out. Usually we only fish three at a time. Um, a while back, Benny and I were gonna do like some teaching trips. Benny did a couple. My problem is every time that I saw a good weather window to do a teaching trip, I'm like, shit, let's just go fishing. So I need to get those going. Ryan, if you want to come down and go fishing, just let me know. I'm sure we could get something scheduled. Just depends on whether you want to do like a teaching trip or just go fishing. Um, one of
So
the
the answer
reasons
is yes. I mean, people take either.
a lot of a lot of reasons I'm always testing something on the water, whether it's a prototype or something. So I keep like a very tight knit group of people that I can trust. Um, so a lot of times when people ask me, it's just a lot of it. I just don't want people to see what I'm working on. And then two, most of our trips are literally like I fish with Anthony Belmonte with Figured It Out pretty much every time I go. He might call me the night before or like the day before or 2 days before. And he's like, let's go fishing. And I hit up a couple guys, a couple can go, and we make the run. So it's nothing personal against anyone.
Joe, this is 100% true. I talked to Joe Vito the other day. Joe mentioned your name again. He's probably gonna make a comment for it. He said the same thing. He goes, "We go, and sometimes I get a night notice, maybe a day or two
Yeah.
notice. Like it's not very much of, hey, we plan these out. It's like, hey, we are
Well,
going. Do you want to come now?"
a big thing is like Anthony's such a well-known captain to where he's booked up all the time. And luckily, like some people cancel, like whether it's lucky for us, not lucky for him, and people cancel on him. He's like, "Hey, you guys want this?" And we jump on. So I can always count on a few of the guys and count on everyone but Derek. Derek usually too cheap to go, and so we usually roll without him.
Because of y'all's trip, I signed up for a Belmonte trip. Me and Greg. So as soon as I saw y'all catch the black grouper, I messaged my cousin. I was like, "You want to do one before we get on the AP?" And I was like,
Yeah, I know
"So I
Anthony's
told y'all
cool. Yeah, I mean, if you guys, I'll jump on that one if you guys got a spot if it's around. But
yeah, we can
Anthony's
make
great. He's just
it.
he's a super cool dude. He knows how to keep the boat in position. He's just a great dude, man. So he's got a lot of good spots on lock. The black grouper was super cool that Henry caught. Like that's what I'm still chasing. And
I've
yeah, man.
talked to
So
Henry a
hopefully I
lot
get it
about that
soon.
fish recently.
Yeah, that was an amazing fish. It was a beautiful one. Super happy for Henry.
Henry's another good guy. If
You,
you ever get a chance to talk to, he is a walking encyclopedia, fish biology or just behavior. So not to pivot a
yeah,
little bit,
Henry's
but if
an
you ever get some
amazing
questions,
dude,
talk to
man.
him.
Yeah, yeah. Henry's one of my favorite people to fish with. He's one of the first people to get an invite every time for sure.
So I was super excited when more to talk to him on it. Okay, so let's kind of move on to another item for it. And maybe you can tell us this because people are asking questions of more specifics. Are you a pro or no pro swivel guy now?
Currently, I don't fish swivels. Used to fish swivels all the time. I don't think there's really a negative to it. You could argue it creates a like I mean this is like might as well not even be mentioned, but you could argue it has a little more slack in the system, but not enough to matter. If you're using like a giant swivel, then I think it could have some negative benefits. Um, if you're using a swivel, I would say be realistic about the pressure that it's going to take. Um, Also, it doesn't need to be a huge swivel. I don't think it needs to be a ball bearing swivel. When I was using them, I was using the Van Fook just basic swivels. Never had a failure, never rusted or anything like that. Um, Now the thing with solid rings is you have to be careful with solid rings because they're not all the same. Some of the ones that are kind of stamped out aren't perfectly round and will kind of have like a flat edge or almost like a taper point. So if there's a lot of pressure, it can pull through the knot. So you need to make sure if you're using a ring, it needs to be a welded ring and it needs to be perfectly um, a perfect circle. Another thing is if you use a solid ring, when you're changing out your split ring, if you're not careful, your split ring can actually hit the leader, like the knot, and start digging away at it and create a weak point. So for most people, I would say use a swivel if you're just not too sure. So for me, the type of terminal connection I tie, you can kind of see it here. I don't know if it's going to show or not, but like, so I don't use a I don't use a swivel or anything to connect to my jig. It's like its own Kevlar loop, and that
Interesting.
yeah, that type of loop it protects from the split rings or anything like that from hitting the knot or hitting the leader. The Kevlar kind of makes like a barrier.
So talking a little bit more technique. This is something that you asked me and I brought up for you. We had a weird, interesting dynamic for it. When you caught one of your big kitties, it is what you were like. You think that's considered slow pitch. When you do that little speed move, you do a little bit
hmm
for it, a little bit pumping. Can you go over some of the techniques, like some of that kind of stuff like that, that people definitely don't have that in a lot of their toolboxes, like that technique, or just things that might be a little different for it that might benefit somebody?
Yeah, I mean, you could think of it, just imagine like old speed jigging essentially, but it's not going to be the same as speed jigging because the rods aren't as stiff. The gears aren't as high of a gear ratio. You're not moving it that fast out of like the strike zone. And even speed jigging in the past, you would catch a lot of grouper while trying to target amberjack and whatnot. A lot of the grouper species we have in the Gulf will come up for the jig. Kitty Mitchell, for example, like I've had him eat probably 50 foot off the bottom. Snowies, I think I had one snowy eat close to 75 foot off the bottom. Um, don't be scared to work the jig up. So my thinking is like most of the time, as soon as I hit like on a new spot, I'm gonna work that jig up at least 30 foot just to see if something is gonna take it. Because if I do get a bite at 30 foot, even if I bring it up 30 and on the drop it gets eight, like 10 foot down, I've still got 20 foot of leeway between that fish and the bottom. So we want to try to lure that fish off the bottom to have the best chance at it. That being said, sometimes it doesn't work, and if you come 5 foot off the bottom, you might not get a strike. Red grouper, for example, if you guys come down here and fish the red grouper, a lot of days they don't want that jig moving. Like you're just kind of bouncing it there, almost like you're fishing for tile fish. Sometimes you just literally leave the jig sitting there, and you're gonna get bit. Versus if you try to move it, you're not gonna get touched. Um, so I would say for people, just experiment with it all, but don't think just because you're targeting grouper that you shouldn't work the jig off the bottom. Because other than maybe like a big Warsaw or something that's very slow, maybe they won't come up. I'm not sure, but I know gags, black grouper, Kitty Mitchells, snowies, scamp. I know they all come up. And if some of you guys want to check it out too, just go watch spear fishing videos and watch when those guys are coming down to a spot, how many times those gags and those black grouper are suspended up like 50 foot off the bottom.
So I guess that's a good question leading into that. Do you use the same technique or repetition or cadence every time you drop, or are you changing it up? Like when it hits bottom, Are you have the same go-to every time, or are you doing something different depending on situations where you're changing it up?
I mean, I like to think I change it up, but like when I go to watch up myself on video, a lot of times like I'll find myself in a pattern to where when I go the next time, I'm making sure that I don't fall into that same trap. So sometimes I'm doing like what would be considered like a technical, like the most basic movement, which is one pitch jerk, which is every time the rod lowers, there's one crank. Sometimes it's only half a crank, sometimes it's a quarter crank, and changing that type of stuff up. So I try to, like on a single drop, I'm going to be changing it all the time. So like there's some videos I have where they might be a 30-second clip, and I've literally switched techniques maybe 7 times in that's very short window. So I'm constantly changing unless like you change that stuff until you recognize the pattern. So with jigging, the most important thing is finding that pattern. And once you find it, stick with that pattern until it's not working. But don't think that just because you found the pattern in the morning, that pattern is going to be the same in the afternoon. Maybe even only spot to spot or hour to hour. You constantly have to be trying to find it.
So if
And
you
I
guys
think
want to
that's
see
what makes a
some of
good
the,
jig fisherman is recognizing a pattern.
I didn't interrupt you. I was gonna say is Chad does a good job of posting all the videos and what he was talking about within 20, 30 seconds of him doing it. So go check out his Instagram. Most of you guys are already following him. He's got really good videos of him having pretty good angles, and you can watch the technique and kind of what's working, and you get to see hookups. You get to see it actually being put to use, which is always nice to know that it's actually working. And what he said is true. Within, like, you sent me one that was probably a minute, and you had 3 or 4, maybe 5 different techniques, and I was asking you piece by piece. I was like, you did this one quarter, you did this one the full crank
Mhm.
for it. So definitely go check out his videos, and you kind of help put some of what he's saying into perspective where you can see
And
that.
kind of going back, let me take a step back, talking about like the movement off the bottom. One thing I would challenge people to do is like you constantly hear like the jig gets bit on the fall, like it's all about the fall. Nowadays, I think about it differently that the upwards movement is what gets the jig or the fish's attention, and he just eats it when it stops. And so like Sato will always say like the fish bites when the jig stops, but you need some action to get that fish's attention. So it's not constantly always on the fall because there is a theory as well that sometimes the fall will actually scare the fish away. It's like if you're constantly doing that long fall motion and just dropping the jig as far as it'll go, you might actually be scaring the fish away versus like it's okay to lift the rod and reel a little bit on the way down just to cut the fall short and kind of be like stepping your way through the water column instead of only working one section all the time, which is what most people do, which is fine if you're tile fishing because you just drag that jig through the mud. So
No, these are really great advice for. I think these are some of the biggest questions everybody would ask me is technique for. I think it's one area that
it's
you watch
difficult.
your videos or people who use the reel more. And I think that's a big thing for everybody. You start using the reel more. You don't know as much as you think you do. Like very quickly, you get very humbled when you
It's
watch
it's
people start
it's
using the reel.
very getting used to learning to use the reel while you're like jerking is very, very difficult. Braid plays a massive role in that, like choosing the right braid. The difference between 15-pound braid and 20-pound braid or 4 strand versus 8 strand, that stuff plays a very significant role, as well as the rod that you're using. So it can make it very easy or very difficult on you.
We want to go down the braid route then.
Sure.
So, what braid do you recommend, and what are people using that you say you probably shouldn't be using that? Like, what are some? When somebody asks me, what are rookie moves that you're seeing people do that's incorrect, or just bad habits that you say people could benefit by changing up some?
I think the biggest thing with braid I see is like a lot of people buy braid based on social media hype versus like marketing from like YouTubers and stuff. A lot of the braid that's out there is marketed as jigging braid just because it might have like coloring on it, but it's actually what I would say is casting braid. Not saying 8 strand, 12 strand, 16 strand isn't going to work. So when it comes to jigging, 4 strand is ideal. The reason being is 4 strand has less stretch. So if you're fishing shallower water, let's say like sub 600 foot, you might not notice it as much fishing 8 strand because you don't have as much of a bow in your line. But if you start fishing like deeper, like 1,000 foot of water, people argue like, well, 8 strand's thinner, it's more round, it's gonna cut water better. It's not necessarily that it cuts better or worse. The problem is 8 strand stretches more. The more stretch, let's say it's only like 5%. 5% over 1,000 foot of water is a big bow in your line. So now you're fighting against that huge bow. So that in turn makes you lose feel to the jig. So 4 strand will have less stretch and keep you connected to the jig much, much better than 8 strand will. Um, Another thing with braid I see people doing, which is totally fine, is using non-multicolor braid, which I never used multicolor that much. What made me change was the more I fished with the owner of Deepliner, was like when I would get a strike, he'd be like, where was the strike? Like, how deep? And I didn't have an answer because I was always counting my cranks to find like how high up I was. The problem is once you get into a fight or something, that goes out immediately. Like you don't know.
Yeah.
And so I think using metered braid, like so multicolor braid, and learning that color, the color coordination on that braid is super, super beneficial to people because you know that like if you, let's say you go to the bottom on the braid I'm using, every color change is, I think, 33 feet on the one I'm using right now. So if I want to work that 30-foot water column, I know as soon as I get to that next color, I need to go back down. Also, if I hook up and I know that I'm getting to a certain color, I've got to start putting the heat to the fish. Otherwise, I'm going to get broke off. So there's those little things you could take advantage of just by using something different.
No, it's great. Sorry, we had another question sent
No,
in,
you're fine.
and then I have my laptop for comments, and then the cell phone for recording. So going back to that one, that's a valid point too, because I think a lot of people know if their reel can crank, but when you take line off the spool, that changes, right? So then if you say, hey, I know I have 48 inches per crank, but if you have a ton of line out, you don't get that same 48 inches per crank depending on that.
Yeah, and
So that's kind of a
so if you add if you add more stretch to the system, you're losing even more. So I think that the thing is though is like if let's say you're someone that's used to using an 8 strand braid and you go to a 4 strand, it's gonna feel terrible to you because it vibrates more through the guides, it's more resistance. So some people just don't like using 4 strand for that reason, which is once again, it's totally fine. Um, the other downside to 8 strand is that you're using, once again, you've got 8 smaller strands, so they break down much, much faster versus you have thicker strands or 4 thicker strands to where they don't break down as much. So it's another reason I like 4 strand. I
do you
never,
think I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
No, please continue.
I was gonna say I've tested multiple different ones. Like I've tested the fuse lines, the 8 strands, the 4 strands. Even though I'm saying I only use 4 strand, I've got an 8 strand that's coming in the mail right now, a new one that came out that's supposed to be less stretch that I'm going to test. Because I think one thing also is like you can always be set in your ways, but if you're too scared to try something else, I mean, you're just making yourself look like an asshole. So it's like I'm going to constantly change all the time. My opinions might change, thoughts might change, but I'm going to constantly be searching for the next best thing. And so it doesn't hurt to try it.
So my question on the 4 versus 8, have you noticed a difference in, say, your knots, like doing a PR knot with the 4 versus 8? Do you think
Mhm.
one is more ideal or works better for doing knots or sticks knots better?
Yeah, so one thing you got to be careful of is if you use like let's say Berkeley Fireline. Fireline has a coating on it. Some of the 8 strands don't want to bite into the leader well, and so if you don't give the knot like a good pull test before you go fishing, it might slip on you. So 4 strand will generally bite way better will generally bite way better into the leader. Overall, for jigging, 4 strand is the way to go. Like if you've got the option between 4 and 8, buy 4 strand.
All right, so I'm going to address Benny's question now. This goes back to technique. Said another technique question, maybe something folks don't think about. What action are you trying to create with your rod while pitching? I personally think that I'm trying to create an S wave with the rod. Often I see people mostly just lifting. What are your thoughts on the physical motion of the rod's action and how do you create it? Great question.
Hmm. I don't think of like an S or anything like that. I think of what he's talking about exactly.
Yes.
Benny, try to refine it. Like I don't exactly get what you're saying. I'll try to read it.
Maybe you can read it and I just did a bad job
Yeah,
reading it.
post it again, Benny.
Why can't I scroll down?
I don't know why I can't see the comments. They like
Somebody
pop
said,
up and disappear.
yeah. I'm going to read through all the shit talking too. Not mad about it. It makes it actually pretty entertaining.
But basically, like if the way it sounds like to me is like, how am I getting the motion out of the rod? Is that what you would say?
Yeah, because I thought the same thing. Like when we did like a lot of trout fishing, right, or a lot of
Hmm.
flounder fishing, it's like you're trying to know what are you trying to make the lure do for it, and your motion kind of goes along with
Hmm.
it. Like what are you trying to do with the rod to get the motion you want for it?
Yeah. So I mean,
Here
what all? Let me see.
you go. Or do you just copy and paste it?
Okay. Okay. I mean, I'll give what I think is what he's trying to say. Like
I think
I'm not sure on the S movement, but like for me, what I think of is like I honestly think like if I was to like when I get a new jig, the first thing I'm gonna do is yeah, okay. I get what you're saying, Benny. Yeah, so a lot of people what he's saying is just kind of lift the rod and let it fall versus like I know for me, I don't think about like an S, but I think of like whether like the rod's gonna be positioned under my armpit or whether it's gonna be positioned under my forearm. Like that's the way I kind of think about it, and then where I'm going to apply the motion with the reel to get the action of the rod that I want. So, like for me, if I want to apply like a very short action to the jig, like a punchy action, I'm going to have the rod underneath my armpit because that immediately cuts off the amount of lift I can get on it. It's going to just kind of shut it off at like the parallel motion. Doing that, if I start pointing the rod, I'm trying to think of how I can explain it, but if I have the rod like under my armpit pointed at the water and I apply motion with my hand, I can get that jig to kind of dart to the side, but in a very short window. I'm not doing a lot of lifting and focusing on the fall. I'm just focused on the punch. Versus if I want a longer motion, now I'm going to put it on my arm, and just depending on whether I want the jig to have um, like more propulsion, I'm just changing that with the reel. I'm not thinking so much about what I'm doing with the rod. The reel itself for me is what dictates the rod motion. And if I want either less or more, I can do that by changing the rod. That's just for me. And then a lot of times though is like I think about the jig that I'm using and I'm trying to imagine what that jig's doing down there and just adjusting the rod motion to try to achieve that like in my mind, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question, Benny.
this is why I said I told somebody the more I talk to you guys, the realize I learn. I know as little as possible. I realize this now. So can you go through like when are you putting under your arm versus going down the rabbit hole versus the other armpit when you're doing the punch versus the lift? Like, can you give a little bit more on that one?
Oh, Benny. Or not Benny, Derek. I can't see what he's saying. The
When you get a stroke,
what do you say?
when you get a stroke, what is the proper hook set? Cranky method, and once hooked up, what is the proper fighting
Uh,
method?
okay. Yeah, I
Or
mean,
strike. He did put after strike.
I'll answer that one after. What was your question you asked, David?
The forearm versus the armpit. When are you going with more of the punch under the armpit versus the lift with the forearm?
So the punch kind of under my armpit, like ideally if the fish are acting more aggressively or if I'm trying to see if they're acting more aggressively and I want the jig to be able to get a punch easier, having it under the armpit and limiting the rod motion, like having it pointed just at the water and then only working parallel, that actually makes like puts the rod in the stiffest point, like it's the strongest point. So when I punch like that under the armpit, even though it's a short rod motion, the jig is moving at like the farthest possible point that it can on the upwards movement. Versus if I want to focus more on the fall, then I'm going to have it under my forearm. I can still apply some real motion to it, but it's not going to move it as fast as if I was doing it under the armpit, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because the more you get up here, the rod already has a load in it, so it can't really transition the power into it as much based on the way it feels to me. And you can change that by going to a higher power and get more action out of it.
No, that makes sense. These are a ton of questions I've been asking for, and I really appreciate you going because that's the big thing we discussed. Me and you've talked a lot is the punch, right? And you've gone through showing me jigs, how to get them. Some require more effort to flip over. So I
It
think
would
it's a great
essentially
thing.
be like if you went to like that type of movement, you could consider like starting to get into like the high pitch movement, which is essentially just like overpowering the jig and punching it with the reel with a very heavy, like shorter rod. And that comes in with certain jig styles, targeting amberjack, yellowfin, tuna, your pelagics, stuff like that. But it also can work for grouper.
So leading into the next one, right? So I think it's a question I've asked you, and this might sound like a dumb question, but I think I've asked. How are you setting the hook? That was the perfect one too. You get a hit. How are you setting the hook? And then what are you doing to get a better hookup percentage based upon that?
So everyone makes mistakes. I still make the mistake of trying to set the hook, like on certain areas. In a perfect world and in a perfect situation all the time, as soon as you feel that bite, you need to just start reeling as much as you can, very similar to if you were fishing with a circle hook. And you need to get all that slack out of the line. Just that hook or just that jig moving has enough pressure to set the hooks in the fish. So ideally, just getting to where you feel the weight of the fish, and then you just pull straight back if you're in the position on the boat that you can. Otherwise, just give it a quick little hook set. There are times where the fish hits on the very top of the movement, where your rod is up here. You might need to like just give it the subtlest hit, and then start reeling back down on it, and then give it a better hit. Would be my opinion on it. So kind of depends on where the fish actually eats, based on my experience.
No, it's a great question because I thought that too. Like you just mentioned, hit on the top, trying not to high stick it. Like you get hit high,
Mhm. It's
cranking,
a
and then you
fine
start
line.
low very quickly to kind of get it so you don't high stick that.
What I see people do, like especially if they break a rod, they get hit while they're up here, and then they just bill dance it, and try to rip the bass's lips off, and it's just not. If you have the right hooks, you have the right terminal tackle and everything, you don't need to hit them that hard. But I think hook selection is a major thing.
So what are your top three hooks then? If somebody's gonna get hooks, right? So we're gonna say doubles only. What hooks should they be going with?
So if duels only, the ones I would recommend, you have to tie your own because they only come pre-rig singles, are the Van Fook 4.0s. Excuse me. It's the best all-around hook that I've used.
Four O's? You said four
The
O's?
4.0s. Yep. I
Got my
tried Sateki for a while. Sateki wasn't a bad hook. The problem I was hitting with Satekis is the tips were rolling on me pretty bad, so I was constantly having to sharpen them. Um, Van Fook makes a very similar hook to the Satekis that I was using, which is called a jig and hyper. So there's a jig and standard, and then there's a jig and hyper. I would recommend you get the jig and hyper and like the 5.0 size is a good all around hook. Now for singles with a spade, you're gonna have to splice and all that stuff. If you want to do that, you can, but realistically, like the singles that I like when I was with Gamakatsu for a while, the Gamakatsu 620 is very tough to beat for a pre-rig single because it comes with such a slow taper tip that is exactly what you want for a single. So I would say Gamakatsu 620 and I think it was the 6.0. It's either 5.0 or 6.0. Benny will have a better answer on that one as far as I haven't used them in so long.
So I got a couple people asking about this Van Fook spears. What do you think
Mhm.
about those?
That's the ones I use. Like any fish that you see on my Instagram, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be on on a spear 4.0, occasionally on like a spear or on a jig and hyper 5 or 6.0.
So when you were saying 4.0 a minute ago, that's what you're referring to was the spears?
The spear, yeah. For
Okay.
the jig and hyper, the smaller one would be the 5.0, and the larger one would be a 6.0.
Benny said 6.0s for those Gamakatsu
Gamakatsu
620.
620, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was using the Gamakatsu 620 like 5.0s, the small ones, for like fishing shallower stuff for a while too. But you have to cut those short and retie them to make them very short because the cord is so long.
All right. So I guess the next
One
question. Oh, go ahead.
one thing I would say, like going into hooks, a big issue I see people make, there is a fine line, but you like if you're going to use, let's say, a Van Fook spear and you're going to tie your own, you can't be using like 200-pound cord or
Mhm.
300-pound cord. I see people using this super thick cord all the time, and it's just not needed.
I don't know how
So I would,
they use it.
well, they don't on the spears, but they use it on like their pre-rigged hooks or something like that. Very similar to like having like tinsel or mylar on your hooks. All that does is slow the jig action down, which can be good at sometimes, but if you're wanting, let's say you want to get a jig to punch to the side or anything, having 200-pound cord and bigger is the same as having like mylar or something like that on your hooks. So what I would recommend is like the best cord I found in the USA at least is the Van Fook FC, which stands for like fluorocarbon filled, and either 120 and max 150 pound. But with 150 pound, you have to put glue on the knot, otherwise it will go around the spade. I've got a hook tying video on my Instagram as well if anyone wants to see how I tie them.
Do you mind shooting that over to me after this, and I'll post it in the group and tag you and everything for it, or I'll go find it if
Yeah,
you don't mind.
yeah, no problem.
I had that same issue though you described. Like I was trying to use 200-pound on the spears, and it's so
Hmm.
thick that when I was doing the uni knot style, when you went to tie it and you pulled it off, it wouldn't bite around the spade. It would just pull straight off. So I had to drop down
Yeah,
to 120.
spear is a great hook. It does have a problem, and the problem is so that the way it tapers, like on the bottom of the spear, it's a lot of the hooks will have like a kind of like a squared edge. Are more rounded,
Yeah,
like tapered, and so it doesn't work well with thicker cord, which is a good thing anyways because you don't really need it. We're using 15, sometimes 10-pound braid. I'm using most of the time 30 and 40-pound leader. So why would we use 200, 300-pound cord, you know? So the 120 is pretty ideal. Now, if you start going too light in cord, you'll have to retie like every time you're done fishing, you might have to replace your cord. So the heavier cord, like in pre-rigged, if you're not someone that wants to go retying your hooks all the time, if you're someone who just wants to throw them in a box and use them for another trip, you can buy pre-rigged hooks with 150, 200-pound cord just for ease of use. But just know that they might be limiting some of the jig action.
and you are gluing your knots on your when you tie them or no when you're doing your.
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
You are a pro burning your tag ends on them.
Yeah, yeah, because you want to burn the tag just because like as the day goes on, as it contacts the fish's, whether it's gill plates, teeth, it'll start to wear itself back. So if I was to glue anything, I would actually burn the tag, and you can add a little bit of glue on the just the tag end just so it can't fray as easily throughout the day. One thing you want to make sure, if you do glue the knots, make sure that you don't use too much glue, because what it'll actually do is climb up the cord above the knot and make the hook assembly stiff. So it needs
Yeah,
to
I
be
learned that
only
the
on the
hard
knot
way.
itself. Yeah, me too.
Especially because a lot of us will put it and then you hang it upside down to dry
Mhm.
if you're not
Yeah, don't
using
do
the
that.
new one, and then it just runs right down it. So
Yeah,
rookie glue
especially
is
if you're
for it.
using like
So.
a super thin glue.
Yep. Oh, I
So, yep,
definitely
it
learned the hard
happens.
way a million times on this stuff.
What else we got?
I got a question for you. So everything goes successful. You work the jig right. You set the hook. Now you're in for the fight.
Mhm.
Walk us through how you're fighting fish. Let's walk through like a normal, just say snapper, something smaller versus something bigger where it's peeling out line and you got to put some heat on it. As far as the drag, what are you doing working the drag and or just fighting your fish in general so it's successful? One, not to break off, not to snap a rod, and increases your chance of getting to the boat.
Well, let me start off by saying I think some of the best advice I ever got was by one of the best jig fishermen I know, which is Louis Ramos. You guys don't know who Louis is. He's by far the king of catching grouper over 100 pounds on slow jigging, probably in the world. The best advice I got from Lewis was find a braid that you like and learn everything about it and learn where that breaking point is and like the way to feel that breaking point. So first of all, start out with a braid that you like and learn that braid inside out and how far you can push it. Now, fighting a fish, one thing to keep in mind, like for me, is that my drag is set at maybe 8 pounds at strike. Like I fish super light drag compared to most people. And then as the fight goes on, I use a lot of my thumb and index finger. Um, so let's say I get a bite, first thing I'm gonna do, reel down, get tight to the fish, make sure I'm hooked up well. If I'm in the stern of the boat and I can, my rod's gonna be as straight up and down as possible. Obviously, a lot of these boats we have higher gunnels, so we can't be. But you want that rod as pointed as the water as you can. And you don't want to be trying to pump on the fish. The more you pump on the fish, like if the rod is loaded, that fish has room to pull the rod down and can actually get its head turned as that rod flexes. So ideally, what you want to be doing is point the rod to the fish as much as you can and just be reeling every chance you get, even if it's only like a quarter crank. Just keep getting every inch you can on that fish. Obviously, I'm using meter line. I'm paying attention to where it's at. Depending on the species, a lot of times you'll be able to tell whether it's a grouper, amberjack, whatnot. Um, if it's a grouper, they can only run a certain distance based on the type of species, like the species they are, just type of like just group, like demersal species can only run however many I forget how like what the correlation is, but they don't have a lot of they can't run a long distance. So if I know I've got a grouper hooked up or what I think, and I've got him 30 foot off the bottom, if he wants to run back down, I'm not going to panic and try to tighten the drag down. I'm just going to let him get that run over with, and I'm going to gain all that line back. Um, Ideally, the way I'm getting that line back is like pointing the rod in the water, pulling back straight on him, and reeling down as I go down. So if you've got the rod pointed straight at the fish, he's just pulling directly against the reel. There's no give anywhere except the drag. And so ideally, you want to just think of it like a trailer winch or like a trailer winch. You just have all that tension there. That's what you want. You know, like the Deepliner guy during a seminar, he'll do a demonstration where he'll have someone sitting across the room and the person will be holding onto the line. They'll take a rod and kind of like pull against it like standard fishing style, like if you're inshore or something, and you can't move the person, you can't move his arm. But if he points the rod directly at the person and the person's pulling against the reel and you give a jerk back, the person falls off their feet just because you're in just a straight line there. There's no give. Other than that, once you hook up, just be patient. Don't be try not to panic. You know, I still panic sometimes. Like I lose plenty of fish. When you make drag adjustments, make them very, very fine. Don't just shove the drag to full max just because you're panicking. Try to be patient with it. And yeah, just try to stay calm under pressure.
No, it's really great advice. I've learned that the hard way. I hooked into something big on a party boat, and I was afraid. And I started. This is my first was year and a half ago. I started pumping a little too much for it. I was trying to get it in. I got really excited for it, and the jig also. If you're pumping, that jig is bouncing around and also walling out that hook for it too. So everything was working against me, and so I definitely learned the hard way. And the cool thing is, if you want to see what Chad's talking about, he has a cool recent video, and I've asked you about this. Same thing. I was like, you had the rod almost in the water, and you were pulling straight back. So go check out his Instagram. And I forgot what fish you were fighting. You were actually using that technique
It
recently on one of the trips.
was there was the main one I would say is there's a Kitty Mitchell video on there that I was able to get it as vertical as possible. Like I said, sometimes you won't. One thing, if you do watch the videos, there's some videos that look like I'm pumping, but I'm not. Like the rod only comes up when that fish is swimming up and kind of making the rod go up. I'm trying to reel as much as possible. Like I'm not applying any pressure when that rod is kind of bent up. Like I'm just trying to reel. So don't let it confuse you.
No, yeah, that I saw that because I asked you, I go, is your rod in the water? And you're like, it's titanium guides. I have no problem putting my rod tip in the water.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
keeps
that's not gonna hurt anything. And like that's like where the solid blanks come in, is like solid blanks are good for people that are learning who might potentially break a rod. But as far as like fighting a fish, you're kind of like hurting yourself in a way. Like if you try to fight a fish with a solid blank the way they're kind of designed for, because you're not gaining anything by lifting on the fish. It's only hurting you. Um, so ideally, like the more you can learn to fight a fish pointed as straight as you can at it, the more that opens you up to fishing the higher end and higher end rods. Because the stronger the rod is, you're losing something on the back end. Like there's no one rod that's going to do both. Like the closest thing I've seen is probably the Saltiga 55, but even still, that rod is missing a lot of the performance benefits of a very high end rod like a Deepliner when it comes to jig movement because of the way they bend so much into the butt section.
No, this is really great information for it. I saw also your wife was talking to you. Do you need we can cut this
No, you're
soon
good,
if you need to. So,
man. No, she's good.
so what are some other rookie moves you see on a boat? I know you say you fish with the same guys, but obviously you have to watch videos. You probably see stuff that make you cringe or roll your eyes. What are some of the things that you're seeing that people are doing they may not know is incorrect or
I would say
no?
one of the biggest mistakes I've seen recently is like, let's say someone posts the jigs they're going to take with them on a trip. They don't realize that they'll have like 20 of one jig and one jig only. And then all the other jigs in their bag or bucket or whatever they have, they're a different brand, but the weighting on those jigs are all the same. As far as like, are they front weighted? Are they rear weighted? Are they neutral weighted? And so when they go to make a jig change, they're switching to a different jig brand, but they're using a jig that has the same exact fall pattern as the one they just took off. So I would say jig selection and making sure you have the right type of selection is a big thing. Um, Another thing I see is people like technique wise only focusing on the fall and never trying to work the jig up. Um, and lastly, when they are focusing on the fall, they get up and they're reeling very fast from the top and just stopping all of the potential fall from the jig, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And we've had a big discussion on the first one. So the big thing is me and my cousin and everybody have talked about jigs and talking to Benny. It's like, or they'll have the same jig, just different color. So they think they're just changing the color, but they're not changing anything else between them for
Hmm.
it, where it's the same jig, just 50 of them, just different colors. You're not getting different
Yeah.
patterns, different anything for it, or not. So a different action, different weight, or anything. Is there let's just call it a jigging for dummies way of quickly looking at a jig or holding it so you know how it's weighted, like front, balanced, like any way besides just kind of playing with
Yeah,
it?
well, I mean, you can just take like if you look at like the spindle narrow, the mass of the weight is up front, like on the top. So this is the top, okay? So all the weight is on the front side of this. That means this jig is going to very easily get on its side, and it's not going to fall very far generally. Then take something like an FB. An FB is more neutral weighted, so center weighted jig here. Okay, so that's going to have a different fall pattern. Some jigs on the back end are going to have more weight on the rear end. Okay, so just finding all those different types of little intricacies in jigs. Do they have like sharper ridges on the side? Are they more rounded? So just paying attention to where the weight's at. It's pretty easy when you hold the jig horizontal and kind of look at it.
So if the market is kind of flooded with, let's just say torpedoes, right? That's what we see everybody's using. It's kind of like the
You guys can thank Deepliner for the torpedo.
everybody uses the hell out of them. So thank you, Deepliner and or everybody. So definitely appreciate it. So what is the jig pattern, or it's not the same pattern? That's bad. Sorry, I keep using the term. What is the jig shape and or weightedness that people are missing that they probably should take advantage of? Like if everybody look, you see nothing but torpedoes, you're like, man, you are missing out on this one that's really great. That is a
Yeah, I mean, even just having something just as simple as something like a deep liner spindle or a CX, like a CX is going to be more rear weighted, but a wider profile jig. And that jig will kind of like do like a slalom down and spiral. So rear weighted jigs generally will have kind of like a slalom type fall. You can look at a jig like a seafloor control rector that has like a more leaf falling type motion. Um, just e- even just having something that is more front weighted, just so they have something that falls very neutral. Just all those little different intricacies. Like you can, if you look at the jig close enough, you'll find out. Another thing, speaking of mistakes people make, is, I made a post on it, is making sure you put the hooks on the correct side of the jig is a big problem. So if like you look at this jig, you've got the heavy side and the light side. So that means as the jig gets on its side, it's going to fall heavy side down. You want to make sure the hooks are on the top side of the jig so that as it's falling, the hooks are coming down this way and not wrapping around the jig, if that makes sense. If anyone wants to look at it, I've got a post in the Texas group somewhere for it.
I gotta find this one because that one's starting to blow my mind. I followed along with everything. I think this is the one part where you got me. But I'm
Okay.
gonna have to go figure out how to put the hooks on correctly now.
Yeah, I mean, just making sure. I mean, you could still catch fish with it. It's not gonna be a problem. What happens though is if the hooks are on the heavy side of the jig as it falls, the hooks will start to wrap around the leader, and they can get caught up, and you might miss a bite on the top of the jig.
I have to go play around with putting them on to see. Basically, I need to put heavy side down and then figure out how the hooks are gonna be, if they're gonna be caught, or I guess I'm gonna have to get with you to figure that out. I think this is an area, an opportunity for sure.
And it's tough. Some jigs are tough to tell what's top and bottom, especially if you have a jig that the company puts a sticker on both sides of the jig. Like Deepliner, it's always going to be they put a sticker on one side, and it's always on the opposite side of the sticker. Sticker's always on the heavy side down.
No, I think that was a really great one for it. I definitely have to think of that one. Okay, so there's a question that I've seen you and Benny talked about, but it's kind of like expert level. How are y'all balancing? Maybe this goes along to it. How are y'all balancing out y'all's jigs with the hooks? Like somebody's like talking about balance. Is that what you are talking about of how to put them on, or is there a
Mm.
balance with like length or size or?
Yeah, so hooks are kind of like most of slow jigging is based on theory, and hook length and cord length is another theory. And like the one thing you'll see, like if you ever fish with me, is like if you pay close attention, my rear hooks are always longer than my top hooks. Okay, so the reason is that in theory is that if you have longer cord on the back, it can make the jigs like slide further on the fall. Is like a theory that I read on it, so that's just something that I try out. I never have the hooks longer on top. They're either the identical length or the bottom one is always longer than the top. Um, you want to ideally have the jigs cover or the hooks covering as much of the jig surface as possible without tangling up. The reason is have jigs in your box that are like 7 inches long or hooks that are like 7 inches long, which it's just not practical. Um, so these ones, like I'll stick with maybe like a 3 inch long cord. And if I miss a bite in the middle, I miss a bite in the middle. Is something that I am willing to accept.
So that long one you have, right, the spindle. How long?
Mhm.
That was one. Sorry, my screen froze up. I couldn't see it when you said it. So how long are you on that
Yeah.
one?
So this one, like I might only cover like a quarter of the jig on each end. So
So 30 inches is kind of the longest you'll make of cord, you were saying?
yeah, so it's all like what I do is the longest cord I carry in my box or longest hook assemblies is about 3.5 inches long, maybe sometimes 4 inches from the top of the hook to the solid ring. So it ends up being like I don't know, like sometimes like a maybe like 5.5 inch, 6 inch total assembly, but very, very rarely do I use that.
No, that makes sense. So I got one I think a lot of people will benefit from, and I should ask you this earlier, right? I asked you this one like sometimes when I'm jigging, I would foul up like the assist hook would wrap around my
Mhm.
leader. And you discuss with that one for me. Can you go in a little bit? Maybe that'll help a lot of people how to avoid that issue.
Yeah, if you notice, it's always going to be your trail hooks. So your trail hooks are going to wrap around the leader and get caught. All that means is that when you're pitching the jig at like the top of the movement, you're overpowering the jig, and the jig is flipping over on itself and throwing those hooks and grabbing the leader. So you can either go to a lighter power rod for that gram jig, or you can just slow the motion down at the top and be just more subtle, and that'll stop that completely.
Because I think a lot of us have dealt with it. And I've seen a lot of when I was on the Yankee cab, I saw a lot of people have dealt with that. And it was
Hmm.
mostly when we were using bigger jigs for
Hmm.
some reason because I
Hmm.
felt like people were trying to lift it harder because it was heavier.
Yeah.
We didn't see it with a lot of smaller jigs. It was usually the 500 gram, 400, 500 gram
Okay.
that I saw it most happen with.
Yeah. Usually I see it on the lighter ones, but it's all the same. I mean, if you're trying to overpower it, that's what it comes from.
I think that's it for the topic. I got some cool things I want to talk to you about. You want to talk about some of the cool products and stuff you've built? Like somebody that asked a
I
second
got the
ago.
plug. I got the plug here. Yeah.
Not just that. Somebody asked me a second ago, it was very funny. They go, ask him if he's a fan of the chain knot.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that's all I tie. Like realistic. If you're serious about jigging, you should be tying a chain knot and only a chain knot. There's no exceptions. Even
Can you go,
even if it's not a standard chain knot, if you tie a Palomar, if you tie a uni knot, any any type of knot where the tag comes out of the top of the knot, you should at least put like 6 alternating 1/2 inches on top of that knot because it will make it stronger. But yeah, always a chain knot.
you want to tell people why you like the chain knot and why you created the chain knot tool? So if you guys are,
Mhm.
go check out jigworks.com or net, right? No,
Yeah,
jigworks.net.
jig work. Yeah, jig works with an X.net.
So all the stuff we're about to talk about, uh, Chad carries these on there. You want to talk about how you came up with it and why you chose the chain knot?
Yeah, so the chain knot's actually been around for a very long time. It's been very popular for speed jigging guys, like targeting like very big game. The chain knot is pretty much the only knot that will get like no matter what people argue. The chain knot is the one knot that will give you the most likelihood of being at 100% or more of the leader strength. Um, it gives you the most consistent break strength out of any of the knots. Like I've tested, like especially doing the testing for the knot tool. I tested every knot that I knew how to tie hundreds of times, and the chain knot will outperform anything almost every single time. There are variances that you can do to make them stronger or weaker. You can use a uni knot, put the chains on top, and have a plenty strong knot. Where the chain knots come in is that we're fishing with super light leaders, 30 pound, 40 pound. We need to get 100% of break strength out of that leader that we can. So we use the chain knot to make sure that happens. Now, you'll people always post online about like on certain groups like about certain knots and whatnot. Similar like an FG. People get away with FGs and uni knots and like any other type of knot because they're fishing much heavier leader and main line. Let's say you tie, I don't know, let's say you tie a uni knot on 60 pound or 80-pound leader and you only get 50% of break strength. That's a shitload of pressure versus if you're fishing 30-pound line with a uni knot, you can only get like 50% strength. Okay, and that's a whole different level.
Yeah.
So we need that chain knot to get everything we can. PR knot similar. Your PR knot will allow you to get as close to 100% of break strength out of your main line. People that fish FG, guys who do a lot of casting for tuna and stuff, they're fishing 80, 100-pound braid. Even, let's say, like an FG knot is generally around like 70, 75%. That's way more than they need to be able to break that. So they're fine with the FG. So I would say PR knot, anything below 30 pound, and chain knot, ideally anything below 50 pound.
So not to keep hammering questions on
You're
this.
good.
All right, so you mentioned leader.
Pound.
So you're using Japanese leader. What leader are you using, and what is a decent American leader that people can get?
So the one I'm using is called Sunline Blackstream, like a gray fluorocarbon, but it's a very soft fluorocarbon, so it stretches. Then US, I like what is it, the top knot, or yeah, top knot by Yozuri I like. Um, if I was going to use Seagar, I would use Seagar Gold Label, would be the two that I prefer. Now the big thing with leaders though is that very similar to braids, all the diameters are very different.
Yes.
Um, don't look at the label for the poundage, look at the label for the diameter and try to get the diameter that you want. So like most 50 pounds here are actually the size of like a 60 pound, very similar to the braids and stuff like that. Like don't ever look at a braid label and be like, this is the size, because it's not. They're all wrong.
I learned that the hard way because I created a nerdy spreadsheet with all the different leaders and braids, and to show each one's different for it, because I
Hmm.
learned like I was using Daiwa J braid. I think I told you the Daiwa leader,
Hmm.
and it's actually way thicker. I mean, you discussed it than
Yeah.
any other brand for it, and it
Hmm.
was learning that just because it's labeled what it is doesn't mean that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, there's whether it just depends. It's not necessarily false advertising, but maybe they have a different measurement method or whatever it is. But yeah, unless you take a pair of calipers and know how to use like, because you can't just put a caliper on braid and get the true measurement. Like I learned from my buddy Lewis, like how to find out the true diameter using calipers. And they're all very, very off.
No, that's a great one for it. So that's why I was letting everybody know, because somebody sent me some new line recently. Oh, Finn's wanted me to test out some line
Hmm.
for them, and their 20 pound is the same diameter as every other brand's 30 pound. And so
Yeah,
they're
but it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that, okay, instead of you using, like if you were to put that on like a scale and test it, like being able to truly test it, what you're going to find is that's going to break like well over 40 pounds, or it
it
should if
did.
it's the same diameter of 30.
It broke
It should break
close
closer
to
to 50.
40 when I was doing my brake test. It was breaking 43, 44 when I was doing my brake test.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, all that means is like you can step down to their 15 or 10
Yeah.
to put you where you ideally want to be. So, each brand you're going to have to figure out which one you like the best and kind of adjust based on the diameter and break strength.
Yeah, I wasn't saying anything negative. I was just saying everybody has to plan accordingly. Like if I was normally using a 20, I might use, like you said, 15, and
Hmm.
I'm now into what the normal 20 is for. You just have to change accordingly, which isn't always the worst thing for
No,
it. I
I mean,
mentioned that, but
I was going to say, I mean, it's like I know braids that I've used, I know they're off, so you just make that adjustment to offset it. But your
I mentioned that
knots
because
need to
somebody.
be point.
Oh, good.
I was going to say, like with that light braid, your knots need to be on point. And a lot of people are like, well, I've never had an issue. A lot of people haven't hooked up to a big grouper to really be able to test it, like, so it's tough to really to gauge it against anything.
No, I agree with you on that one. For the reason I was mentioning that too is like if you know normally you get 500 yards for it, if it has a different diameter, you might not get that same
Hmm.
amount of line on your reel. So that's why I was saying it's important for everybody to know the diameter of their line. So if they do
Yeah, that for
split it,
sure.
you want to talk about your new crazy invention?
Sure. I mean, just the plug. I mean, first of all, thanks for everyone who placed the orders. Like the first release was pretty cool. But yeah, just the plug that Benny showed the other day. This is actually on a Power 2 logical, so it's extremely small. I still have the grip on there, but that'll be coming off. But yeah, man, they're pretty dope. So super easy, super effective. I literally was going to bed one night because we had the cone design and like we didn't want to release it because the Australia guy already had the cone. And then our buddy Josh solved that issue by giving me the spiral idea. So thanks, Josh Hanna. And then literally one night I was gonna go to sleep and for some reason thought of like a flower vase. And I was like, fuck, that's perfect. That'll work great with the spiral. Next day, woke up, designed a spiral vase style plug and made it, and it worked great. Needed to make some final adjustments to it, and now we've got it. I feel like exactly where we need to. Um, Holds anywhere from 6 millimeter up to 14 millimeter diameter butt sections, as long as they don't have grip tape. If you have a 14 millimeter butt section with grip tape, obviously it's thicker. Then we make a larger model from 14 to 18 millimeters. So currently they only come in black and white. The filament that I'm using, very limited on colorways. So yeah, it is. I've got to work with what I can.
Sorry, I was reading more
Yeah,
of
I
the
told you.
comments.
Oh no, you're good. I know I got some vulgar dudes in there.
Oh, I don't mind. I'm just laughing for it. It's almost. It got really quiet for a little. I was like, hey, maybe they went to bed, and then it's like lube, lube, lube.
Yeah, but no, it's great. I mean, I think I've sold close to like I think I've got to be at least like 300 of them from the first night, and
Sweet. I'm
so
glad that.
hopefully everyone gets them and they like them as much as we do. Um, for anyone who might see this video, when like for the smaller blanks, when this is in the rod holder, the rod is not supposed to be super locked. Like it still has some play in it. That's completely normal. It should be able to slide up and down. That way, once the rod goes in the rod holder, we can push it down into place. It'll still protect the rod perfectly to have a little bit of play in there. It's the only way to make it to where it can be universal. The other one we were trying to do with it not being universal doesn't work well at all. So that's how it's supposed to be once you get them.
No, they're killer.
So
He
Dave,
let me have.
yours went out yesterday too, along with everyone else's. They should all arrive this week.
Uh, Chad is very meticulous about those. He sent me one to test out for him, and he didn't like the way it fit. And so he was like, we spent quite a bit, a few nights, putting calipers on my rods,
Hmm.
putting calipers on the plugs to see the size difference. So he took it super serious to making sure they were perfect for everybody, making them universal. And when they got on, he's like, now slide it. Make sure it does it the way I want. I'm
Hmm.
adding to it with my hand gesture, so we're just going to go down with it,
It's all
making
good.
sure that it's
Send it.
sliding up and down for it correctly versus just being stuck for it. So we went through the quite a bit of measuring and whatnot to make sure that it was exactly kind of what he envisioned for him.
Yeah,
And
and
I thought it
please,
was very telling.
if anyone gets on a boat and they happen to notice that maybe there's a rod holder that we haven't seen before and it's not perfect, please reach out to me, let me know. That's the good thing about it, like being me making them is I can make any adjustments we need. And so last thing I want is for the product that I make to not fit for everyone. And so I can make the chains.
No, they're great. I ordered 5, so I'm stocking up with them. I'll probably get
Yeah,
more in the future.
shout out to Don, by the way. If Don ordered 12 of them. So, shout out to Don for supporting Jig Work. So he's a big supporter of me for sure. So yeah, Don's the man.
No, we
And
appreciate it.
everyone else in the group, a lot of the group members placed an order, so I appreciate it. Any of you guys, like I said, if you notice it doesn't fit the way it should, anything. Obviously, we tested on as many rods that we can that we have a hold of. There's going to be some outlier rods that we don't have access to. So if you see some that we need to make an adjustment for, please let me know.
No, I think that's it for. We really appreciate you
Cool.
being part of the group chat. We appreciate you taking 2.5 hours of your night. I did
No
not.
worries.
Me and you've talked for hours before, and so a lot of this is the rehabbing for. But I think this is a lot of helpful information for everybody. And I know I wanted to share some of the knowledge you dropped on me in Instagram videos when we talked at nights before, and then me messaging you. I think it's going to be super helpful. And anybody who doesn't get to watch this right away, it gets saved in the videos for 30 days. So I'm going to publish it for it so anybody can go back and watch it. please go
And we
buy.
didn't even have to go into the electrics.
Oh, we still can for it. We
Yeah,
still
that's all
can.
right.
We
I
got
won't make any enemies.
no. I don't think it's anything. It's nothing anyway. Hasn't said already for it. If you listen to Dexter, Dexter wants world records, so he doesn't want to use any electrics. A ton of guys are that way. Some of the local guys are that way too. Bo, who runs Galveston Party Boats, he goes, "I'm going to manual crank." He goes, "There's no point. If I'm going to use electric, I'm going to drop bait. If I'm going to use
Yeah,
electric,
now
I
we'll
use."
we'll get into that deep dive another time for sure.
Can I ask a
But yeah,
favor
man.
though? Can we do
Yeah.
more of these after any big trips you do? We come back and we do a recap. You kind of tell us about your trip or anything new and exciting you got. We can do these in the future.
Yeah, that's fine. So I don't know I've got paintball tournament this week, and then next week I'll probably start looking for weather windows again, and then I'll do Japan 2 more times this year, and then I go to Guam in October. So I'll have quite a few trips to talk about.
No, we're excited. And if you got any new cool stuff, please share it with the group, and we'll try to keep supporting you.
Yep, Joe's comment. Yeah. Anyone knows how I feel about electrics? That's why hashtag electrics are for the birds. So any of you guys don't like electrics, tag it in your post.
Also, do
Anyways,
not
yeah,
forget to tag
David, I
if you think
appreciate it,
that.
man. Anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out. Obviously, everything I said, all my opinion. So take it with a grain of salt if you want. So, but hopefully, a lot of the information I put out there hopefully helps you guys in some way, and try it on the water and see if it helps you.
That actually was pretty cool. Josh says, "Much as I fish with Chad, I still learn something new." So,
Oh, he's so sweet.
no, I think that's it. I'm gonna call it a night for it. I know your wife's probably wanting you to definitely go help out with
She's
baby
already
duty. And then,
she's already in bed, so it's all good, man. So,
even better then.
all right, buddy. Well, you guys have a good night.
All right.
Peace.
Thank you, sir.
See ya.